Sorry I wasn't available yesterday. Well, it was a holiday, so I don't think many people were expecting me to be available, but that's why on July 3rd, right before midnight, I did do a midnight live stream going into July the 4th just to celebrate Independence Day with you guys since my July 4th, you know, might have been hectic, although I actually didn't do anything. I just kind of just relaxed all day. Um, if my, you know, wife had been free and we were both in the same place at the same time, then I probably would have actually been busy all July 4th doing stuff with her, showing her very American things. But um, didn't do that. Uh, I forgot my water, guys, so if you don't mind, I'm going to get some water. I think the last time I did a live stream, you actually saw me choke on some water. Uh, so if anyone laughed at that, I'm not bad because I laughed at it myself, choking on water, which is not this what's supposed to happen when you get a drink of water. You're supposed to get a drink of water to keep you from choking, right? But whatever. So I hope everyone had a good Fourth who celebrated. If you didn't celebrate, no biggie. Apparently a lot of people in my grandmother's neighborhood are very patriotic. I seen like flags everywhere. Um, and if I had to speculate on that, I would say it's because most of them are homeowners, whereas living with my sister and mother, a lot of the people there aren't homeowners, and I think they are a lot less tethered to what happens in the community. Here, I think being most people are homeowners, um, they feel more grounded in what happens in their community and in the country at large. Not only that, I mean, Chris Rock had joked several years ago in a stand-up show that a mortgage makes you act right. Like, and it's true. Like most of the people here, they're way like it's some. Don't get me wrong, it's some good people in my mother's neighborhood, which is about 5 minutes, literally just 5 minutes away. It's a younger community. My problem is that a lot of them aren't homeowners, so you get a lot of knuckleheads that come there renting and are in and out, and a lot of tomfoolery going on there. What, but what I do like about her neighborhood is that it's a lot more diverse. We have a lot of South Asian folks in that community. Um, of course, white and East Asian and others, but it's not as diverse here. It's an older community, but it's quieter. Like I said, most people are homeowners in this neighborhood, so it's cool. But in any case, I'm gonna walk and get some water, and while I'm walking and getting some water, guys, I'm gonna tell you what today's live stream is about, because I know people already like, all right, man, you just been talking for several minutes. What's the topic? I'm gonna give you guys the topic. Hint, hint. It's on one of my favorite subjects. So, so So, and just a reminder, as I do every live stream, the proviso is we will only talk about the given topic in this stream. If you want to talk about something else, you will drop a Cash App. The Cash App link is in my description on my YouTube channel. Or you can just go to $ Page Enterprises LLC. Uh, Other than that, carry on. Now, also, the other proviso is I will ban trolls because you little mouth breathing incels need to get a fucking life. So, that too. Now, what is the subject? So, again, I gave you a hint. for folks who've been rocking with me for a while, they know that my favorite subject is philosophy. Um, Only second to cognitive science. I guess more of a balance between cognitive science and philosophy. But we are gonna do something in philosophy. Like I said, I kept saying for months. I mean, for weeks that I'm gonna keep talking about philosophy every here and there, but I'm gonna make it more specific topics within philosophy because when I've tried to do it very open and just said let's talk philosophy, people had no idea what I was talking about. Most half of them kept bringing up religious stuff. Others just kept up just random speculative questions, which has nothing to do with philosophy proper. So I decided whenever I talk about philosophy now, it's going to be a specific topic within philosophy to be able to keep it focused. Hi, Hannah. Excuse me, Vanna. How are you, Vanna? Um, so Ketchup says, "What do you think about Kant? Dewey's important." So we'll get into that. So actually, extra ketchup, and that's a funny that's a funny handle, by the way. I like you put that as trademark. That's funny. You know, all jokes aside, you should actually probably get a trademark. It'll cost you a few dollars, but you never know when you can collect on that, right? He spells it with an I, actually. So anyway, what's up, Thomas? How are you? So yeah, so the topic is in philosophy, and the specific question of the day is, or the night, whichever. um, what is the best moral theory for us to live by? That is the topic. I should have put it in the header, but I ended up clicking this before I did so. So that was my mistake. However, hopefully people can see the background picture where the header is going to be, showing the five different major meta ethical theories, which is deontology, which is what Kantian ethics falls under for extra catch up. Um, you have virtue ethics, which stems all the way back to Aristotle, and well, even to Socrates himself. Um, we have cultural relativism. I mean, moral relativism. We have consequentialism, of which utilitarianism is a form of that. So it might just say utilitarianism instead of consequentialism. And there's some others which we'll all get into. Okay, but yeah, what? And then of course is the biggest but the worst ethical theory that there is around the world, which is divine command theory. Yikes! It's funny that that happens to be the biggest ethical theory used by many people, although it's probably one of the worst. I don't think it is the worst, as some philosophers think, but I think it is one of the worst. Extra Ketchup says, according to St. Thomas, pursuit of the ultimate good, he says, is God. Well, yeah, see, that falls under the divine command theory. The divine command theory has been the divine command theory has been kind of rebutted since ancient times, but it has stayed with us since ancient times, which is the irony of it. Since going all the way back to Socrates himself, he rebutted the notion of divine command theory, uh, in the Socratic dialogues that Plato wrote. There's a story where you know uh, Socrates does his normal Socrates type thing, goes up and questions someone who's talking to him about he turned in his father to the authorities for breaking the law. And Socrates was like, "Oh, so he said, I'm just curious, under what justification did you have to turn in your father to the authorities? Was he a bad guy or whatever?" And the guy was like, "Well, he does what the gods deem to be pious." And so that gets into the dilemma of divine command theory, which is is what the gods command pious because they command it, or do the gods command what is pious, which means we don't need the gods to know what is the most pious to us, or in other words, holy or morally justified, if you rather. And the story ends up going to the fact too that Socrates basically says he doesn't say it. He basically implies by his line of questioning to this young man that he's basically a piece of shit for turning in his father to the law on some bullshit justification that he was doing the right thing. So this is kind of what made Socrates an enemy of many people, because he had no problem letting people know that they were full of shit. And that since that Socratic dialogue came about, it has always been a defeater to the divine command theory that what is ethical is simply whatever's commanded by the gods, or vice versa, that what is that the gods command what is already that is ethical. In that case, we don't need the gods to know what is ethical. On the other hand, if it's whatever commands are given by the gods are ethical, then they can command us to do truly heinous acts, and it would be ethical just because they said so. And we've seen that throughout history when we've had religious leaders tell people to commit atrocious acts because the Lord commanded them. So it's always been a shit ethical theory, but unfortunately, like I said, it's probably the most widespread one across the world, at least within uh, places where they practice the Abrahamic religions. Anyway, let me get to these comments because I've seen a lot. uh, Christopher Stone says consequentialism. It means the same thing as what Socrates' dialogue that Plato wrote. So, Christopher, consequentialism are a whole body of different ethical theories, which basically get around to the fact that um, what is justified by um, an ethical act is that are based on its its foreseen consequences. So you can't just do things. So it's not just you do you're doing something with the right intent. It has to that behind that intent there has to be that the act itself has to lead to the rightful consequences of that act. So even if you did something with the right intent, if it leads to bad consequences, then it wasn't ethical according to consequentialism. You understand? Pocket Surprise Theory says, is solipsism true? How do you know anything? Solipsism is an ethical theory. Solipsism is a view in other branches of philosophy, mainly metaphysics or even epistemology, which is the view that there's only one mind, but presumably you may be that one mind, or I may be that one mind, or whatever. It doesn't matter. It's an extreme version of idolism, but it has nothing to do with ethics per se. Okay. Mr. Hugo, I haven't watched it, but again, the topic today is the topic today is moral philosophy and what is the best moral or ethical theory for us to live by. Okay. So again, I'm not going to answer any irrelevant questions or any trolly stuff, which I'm seeing. But so, guys, that so I should probably, since someone already asked what consequentialism is, I should probably break down all the major versions of the different meta ethical theories. Don't get confused when I say meta ethical theories. Meta ethical theories are just ethical theories about ethics. Okay. So, and I was like, I think you have five major branches of meta-ethical theories. One is deontology. Kantian ethics falls under deontology, which is um, basically um, eth- duty ethics, like ethics where you have a duty to act in a certain way or justified way. That's deontology, more or less, which looks at um, doing like doing something for the sake of duty or something along that lines. Okay. Then we have consequentialism, which I just explained to Christopher, which is that what is ethical is based on the consequences that follow committing or not committing certain acts, right? And utilitarianism, a major form of that, falls under that. Uh, but there are many other forms of consequentialism besides utilitarianism. And even within utilitarianism, there's like a bunch of different forms of it, which all pretty much reduce to only one or two versions of utilitarianism, which is funny. There's virtue ethics, which is probably the oldest form of ethics after you leave outside of the divine command theory itself. Virtue ethics what are is the view that we should embody certain principles or virtues that lead to um, ethical behavior. Like when we talk about something like the seven army values, right? That would be a form of virtue ethics within the army. Courage, loyalty, integrity, honor, these sorts of things. That would be a form of virtue ethics in modern in a contemporary setting, right? But it goes all the way back to Socrates. Like Socrates never gave his own ethical theory per se, but it's kind of hinted at that he was probably some sort of virtue ethicist. Um, then uh, the fourth one might be more of a just uh, descriptive or like a descriptive or ethics or moral or moral behavior or ethic or moral psychology. That's one of the other views of ethics where it looks at instead of instead of looking at it from an instead of looking at it from a prescriptive or normative way, because all the other forms of ethics are normative or prescriptive, which means they tell you how you ought to act, how you should act in a given scenario, at a given time, with a given person, in a given place, etc. Those are normal and prescriptive ethics, but there's a sort of descriptive ethics which teeters on science or moral psychology, which just is more just this is this is how ethics actually works. Okay, that's descriptive ethics. And then, like I said, you had the granddaddy of them all, divine command theory, which comes out of religion, but can be still looked at outside of religion itself, which is divine command theory, which is of one of two, which is goes one of two ways. Either what the God or God's command is what is ethical, or what whatever exists out there that is ethical is then commanded by the gods to for us to do. That's divine command theory. And then of course you have other flavors that fall under those outside of those five that that arguably may fall outside of those five, or may just be other expressions of those, like moral relativism, which is also called ethical subjectivism. Same thing. Whether you say moral relativism or ethical subjectivism, basically mean the same thing. That morals aren't real, and that you know the way we like is basically just how we feel about things. So they there's a lot of people today and even back then who, being of more empirical mindedness, have leaned that way, saying that ethics is just subjective, and they have a strong argument in their favor on that. Related to that, but separate, is social contractarianism or contractarianism, which isn't necessarily moral relativity, but it can be by some who look at it that way. That basically what is ethical is based on sort of a social agreement within society of what we see as right and what we see as wrong. Um, but like I said, those are the major five, and those are like the two honorable mentions that may fall within or without those five camps of ethical meta ethical theories. Okay, so let me catch back up with the uh, comments here. Extra catcher says, "What about the Stoics' view of ethics? Seneca, that ultimate good is wisdom and self-control." Well, again, I just gave the five major camps of meta ethics. Extra catch up. Stoics, Stoicism. Well, for one, Stoicism isn't an ethical theory, right? It contains ethics in it, but it in itself is not an ethical theory. It's more complicated than that. And Seneca isn't the only um, Stoicist. Like the one of the oldest Stoicists was actually a contemporary of Socrates himself. Um, and of course, we all know like the most famous of the Stoics, which is Marcus Aurelius. But what would I say about that? Stoicism might fall under, I don't know, depending on how we view the Stoicism. Because like I said, each each of the major Stoic philosophers had sort of a different view of Stoicism, sort of like existentialism. Existentialism sort of has ethical thoughts in it within it as well, but it's not in itself an ethical theory. Um, but uh, I don't know. Stoicism, like I said, can fall under virtue ethics depending on how you look at it, or it might fall under him. It might actually fall under deontology, which is like duty bound ethics, stuff like that. Honestly, not a big Stoic person, so I wouldn't be able to tell you specifically. Um, I didn't even mention the worst version, the worst ethical theory yet, but I'm going to get there if I can remember the name of it. But yeah, Stoicism is a whole philosophy within ancient Greco-Roman thought. which goes just beyond just ethics itself, if that makes sense. A lot of people have thought that utilitarianism for a while was a great ethical theory because it's more like it's a lot of number crunching, like, and again, utilitarianism is a form of consequentialism, which is looking at the consequences of one's acts. So utilitarianism says what can maximize the most good for the most people. And in that regard, it would seem like the proper theory for ethics, if you just wanted to do like a hard nosed calculus, moral calculus, but it never really works out that well. Polamuni says, "Hi, my son. Why is stoicism for the conformist?" I don't know what you mean. And first of all, I want to give this. I want to say this first and foremost about stoicism. Stoicism is the new trend among self-help gurus and a bunch and especially around a bunch of little business people who don't know shit about philosophy but want to now use stoicism as like this new macho macho philosophy. They don't know shit about how ancient stoicism was actually taught nor practiced in ancient Greece nor ancient Rome, and I really don't give two shits to the wind of how people see it today because most people who talk about stoicism today has never taken an actual philosophy class. So if someone is talking about stoicism and have never actually taken philosophy, I'm not going to take them seriously. No more seriously than I'm going to take someone who talks about quantum mechanics and doesn't have any background in scientific physics from a university. So that's all I'm gonna say about what people call stoicism today. Because like I said, most of it is just a bunch of stuff by a bunch of financial gurus that preach about a bunch of shit they don't know anything they're talking about. But it sounds good to people who know even less than them. What's up, Moonlit Fern? Uh, Glad to see you back, and please do like Moonlit Fern says, guys. Please like and subscribe and share. It's all love here. Absolutely. Like I said, the only person you'll see me being mean to are trolls. That's it. I'll go in on trolls, but otherwise, I'm a pretty low key guy. I'm a nice guy. I get all my violence out in the gym. Okay. But and I don't mean to be mean to anyone who loves stoicism. If you actually like stoicism as a philosophy, more power to you. And like I said, some versions of stoicism are better than others. However, unfortunately, what a lot of people consider stoicism today is not really what stoicism is as an ancient philosophy of Hellenistic Greece or ancient Rome. Okay, it's been mutated into some sort of self help wisdom. Special K is for the horses. I like that. You're like the second funniest handle today, man. But Special K says there are a lot of schizos that talk about quantum mechanics. They do, absolutely. The, and you have a lot of gurus to talk about it, like Deepak Chopra talking about quantum mechanics is an interpretation of enlightenment and all this other crazy stuff. Uh, I think Richard Feynman, who's like a was a really great physicist, said it best. He's like, if you think you understand quantum mechanics, then you you don't know physics, because they don't understand it and they're the best at it. So if you think you know better than them, you don't know physics. But yeah, it's a lot of nuts that get into a lot of nutty people like talking about quantum mechanics. They like talking about very speculative philosophy. They even get into like um, things about psychology and neuroscience. All very heady topics that take a lot of time to learn. So someone talking about it who's never actually taken any in-depth work, like research into it, should cause red flags. Like that this person may not be the most mentally well tethered person. So you're absolutely right on that. Special K. Paul says, finally said, someone said stoicism is mainstream BS. I'm sorry if I'm the first one that's told you that, but trust me, Palamuni, anyone who's actually taken academic philosophy like I have will tell you the same thing. Philosophers, basically, philosophy nerds are getting the same treatment today that psychology people were. Psychology people hate all the self help psychology stuff. When you go to a bookstore, like psychology is like the only field of science that comes in a separate section mixed in with self help and religion. When scientific psychology is nothing like that, so they psychologists used to call themselves the Rodney Dangerfield of sciences, which if you're not old, you won't get that reference. But now philosophy is getting it with the whole Stoicism thing, and even before the Stoicism thing, everyone was started talking about the trolley problem, which is not a very good uh, thought experiment, by the way. We can get into that too, because that does get into some ethical digs, by the way. Uh, Nick Ireland says, I never knew it was mainstream, but I've actually read Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. No, see, that's different, Nick. So you've actually read actual Stoicism. The problem is, most people haven't read like genuine Stoicism. They read like stuff secondhand or third hand by some self help guru. But there are some people like you who've read genuine Stoicism. Marcus Aurelius is, again, probably one of the most famous, but there are others like Seneca, and there was the friend of Socrates, I can't remember his name, who I think is the founder or one of the founders of Stoicism. Polymoni says, bro, that book is mainstream. People aren't even questioning what Aurelius said, they just agree. Well, that's true. Like I said, and that's why I said he's not the only authority on Stoicism. He gives his version of Stoicism. I, on, I for my money, I would go back to the Hellenistic version of Stoicism because Marcus Aurelius, being an emperor, a Roman emperor, and orator, might have a slanted view on it, right? Nick Ireland says, I actually use my critical thought. No, I don't doubt you. But like I said, the problem is a lot of folks who study Stoicism have gotten into it because it's trendy right now. It's trendy within the red pill spaces. It's trendy within like the financial uh, service sector and self help gurus. Um, it's just sort of like how like a lot of business students back in the day used to read The Art of War by Sun Tzu, or they will read The Prince by Niccolo Machiavelli. And my problem with both those books were, whereas The Art of War is a classic reading, classic literature. Um, its thoughts on martial philosophy are vague at best, and they're a bunch of like witty sort of aphorisms. But beyond that, I don't think it's very useful. And with the Prince Niccolo Machiavelli, that's actually a good book. I read the whole thing as I read The Art of War. But the problem with The Prince by Niccolo Machiavelli was it was actually supposed to be political satire, and most people don't get that, which is why Machiavelli himself never published it while he was alive, because he realized that the humor wasn't exactly coming through as he intended. So it wasn't published until after he died, to honor him. But it was meant to be political satire. But the irony is that people are studying it like an actual way of grabbing political power. That's true irony. Moonlit Fern says, I believe they neglected philosophy these days because religious beliefs. Same with science. Um, I'm ignoring him, Moonlit Fern, the other guy. I let people get one dig in, and if they continue, I just time them out or ban them. Because sometimes I can actually convert a every once in a while I've converted to troll. If you notice, like I have people coming in just to genuinely troll, and then they're surprised that I actually respond to them, and they're like, "Oh, I didn't actually expect you to respond to me," and I'm like, "Well, that's what these intimate vertical live streams are for, just to have like one-on-one chats with people. It's not like the super chats where basically I'm just there to give my spiel, and then I'll respond only to people who send me super chats or super thank you. In a vertical live stream, it's just a very intimate conversation with me and the chat room. So I've actually converted one or two trolls. So if I can do that, that's cool. If not, so be it. They get banned. um, what's up, Shubajati? I haven't seen you in a while, man. He said hello, good morning from India, 7:51 a.m. Oh, that's, yeah, because it's so early. Um, I should probably include in. They are. See, I don't know too much about the Hindu uh, uh, Vedic text. I think I'm saying it right, but that has a whole uh, thought, a whole bunch of ethical thought into it as well. However, I'm not well read in Indian philosophy and the Vedic text. So, at your catch up says Zeno. It might be Zeno. Let me see, because there's more than one Zeno, and some of them are pre-Socratic philosophers. So there was actually more than one Zeno. So let me make sure, because I think most, if not all, the Zenos were prior to Socrates. So there's the Zeno of Citium. Was he the one that um, was a Stoic? Yes, he was. So if you're thinking of Zeno of Citium, yes, not the other Zeno, but this Zeno. And I think there was three Zenos actually. I think there was three ancient Greek Zenos, but yes, we hit on the right one. Zeno of Citium, uh, circa 334 to circa 262 BC, was a Hellenistic philosopher from Citium, which is modern day Cyprus. He was the founder of the Stoic school of philosophy, which he taught to Athens from about 300 BC, based on the moral ideas of the Cynics. So that predates Stoicism, but there's definitely a vein of cynicism throughout the Stoic thought, but that would put us down a whole different path. But anyway, Stoicism laid great emphasis on goodness and peace of mind gained from living a life of virtue. In accordance with nature, it proved very popular and flourished as one of the major schools of philosophy from the Hellenistic period through to the Roman era, and enjoyed revivals in the Renaissance as Neo-Stoicism, and in the current era as modern Stoicism. So yeah, Zeno, you hit it right on the. If I could give you an award right now, you would get a cookie right now, extra ketchup for that. Good student. Yes, Zeno of Citium. That's to be more specific, because like I said, there was more than one Zeno. Um, like I said, he was a contemporary of Socrates, I believe, and he founded the school of Stoic philosophy, and that was based on a earlier pre-Socratic philosophy of the Cynics, which has now come to be known as Cynicism. But what we call Cynicism is not exactly what was taught as the school of Cynic philosophy. Just like a lot of today, what we call Stoicism is not based on the school of Stoic philosophy. So, sort of the same thing. Epictetus is a good read. I have that. Actually, I have all the major Platonic, uh, all the major Socratic dialogues by Plato. Epictetus is one of my favorite ones. Well, says, "You lucky I can't kick your bread." I don't even. They don't even bother me because First of all, they're trolls, Moonlit Fern, and again, they can't fight me. None of these dudes would talk slick in my face because they know I would just throw that Superman punch right to him, give him a nice little liver kick. Nick says, yeah, a lot of people do just rehash things without thinking of what it actually means. True. Paula Mooney says, what are your thoughts on hedonism? So, I don't know if you can call it hedonism. Well, I, I guess you can call it ethics. It kind of falls, it does fall into ethics. Actually, not just it's just not a good one. um, I mean, that's basically it. It's not a good ethical theory. It's just based on the pleasure principle. Um, obvious, you don't have to have you don't have to have an in-depth understanding of philosophy to to realize that an ethical theory based on um, only doing what satisfies your pleasure instincts will not go well for neither you nor society at large, right? I don't think it has to be. I think we can arrive at that through just common sense reasoning. No complicated philosophy is necessary to undergo the hedonism. Is not very useful. GJC said, "Evening, what's up, GJC?" Special K is for he retracted. Moonlit Fern says, Art of War I own, but I think it's like Psalms. Exactly, that's exactly what I mean, Moonlit Fern. So you basically express what I'm saying just in a different way. It's a very aphoristic style of writing, and I think it's meant to be motivational, but I don't think it teaches useful martial philosophy, which is what it was supposed to do. Not to mention, I don't think that General Sun Tzu actually existed. I think that was either a pen name or it was just a name used collectively by a bunch of different writers who ended up contributing to the eventual book, The Art of War. But I don't think Sun Tzu actually existed. It's hard to get at that because in a lot of East Asian history and philosophy, um, there's not a premium on facts because in collectivist cultures, there's not they don't have very much uh, value um, placed upon empiricism and realism and stuff like that. So chalk one up to Western world on that. Uh, I don't get all the gay comments. I'm just hyped up on coffee, but because it's late, so I had to get something to be able to stay up to do this. Molly Fern says, "Can you send me a link if you want? I'll join, but I'm drinking." Link on what? Or are you referring to someone else? All right. I don't care if you troll me, Mike, whatever your name is, but you're not gonna bother my other folks in my group, so you're banned. Uh, Special K is for horses. Says, have you heard of psycho-cybernetics? Apparently, it was a self-help movement in the '60s. I found it via a record audiobook based off a book of the same name. If you have, is any of it still valid today? I think I've heard of it before, but not in any like realistic sense, other than like except for like what they've been talking about today with like neural linking and stuff like that, like with uh what's the SpaceX guy again? Sorry, it's late. That guy everyone either hates or loves. But yeah, he's talked about like neural links and stuff like that, and embedding neural chips and folks, and we've looked at some of the technology they used on people who are have severe handicaps. For instance, with Stephen, not Pinker, Steve, what's the other Steve, the quadriplegic physicist. They gave him technology that he was able to uh, use his thoughts to move the cursor on his screen so that he could actually like text people. Um, so that's just in its infancy right now, but we'll probably see more of that, and it's probably going to go to helping a lot of people who suffer from severe handicaps and stuff like that. So if you're talking about that sort of stuff, that is actually real. I don't know what they were talking about in the 60s because I don't know too much about that, to be honest. But if you're talking about the type of cybernetics we have today, where we can actually help people with severe disabilities be able to communicate better, or maybe even be able to move through creating a sort of a link between their brain and their skeletal muscles. That is real. That is real technology, and research is going into that, and it will. And I'm sure a lot of there's a lot of military research on that for obvious reasons as well. Extra because of xenocedium. Yep. Jamal says, "What up?" I don't know why they saying that Jamal, like, they're just trolls basically. They're either 12-year-old boys or they're 31-year-old men with a neck beard living in their mother's basement with Cheeto stains on their t-shirt, thinking they're saying something clever. One of the two. Both are losers. Because if I was a 12-year-old, I would have better things to do, and if I was a 31-year-old, I would have better things to do. So, Moulin Francis says, so not in order, but name your favorite philosophers. I thought you asked me? Didn't you ask me that before? It might not have been you. It might have been Eric, but yeah, I've mentioned them before. I'll mention them again because you know some of my favorite folks. So obviously Plato, because we wouldn't have Western philosophy as we know it today without Plato. Like literally, people have said that all of European Western philosophy is but a footnote to Plato. Kind of true. Um, my next favorite would be um, the Ludwig Wittgenstein. He's probably he was probably the smartest of the early 20th century analytic philosophers, starting from Frege, Gottlieb Frege, to Bertrand Russell, to Wittgenstein, and some other folks. But he was one of the most brilliant philosophers. He wrote his dissertation while fighting in the trenches of World War I, and his dissertation, when he was sent back to Cambridge, was considered so good they just automatically gave him his doctorate by the time he returned. He There was no need for him to do a doctoral defense or anything like, and his dissertation became one of the most important books in all of Western philosophy. Um, he gave us logical truth tables, which are used in computer science today as well as in symbolic logic. His A lot of his thoughts reshaped Western philosophy, and he thought he solved all the problems of philosophy at the time. So he literally just quit philosophy and became a school teacher in Austria, I think in Vienna or wherever. In school, and cool factoid, Ludwig Wittgenstein, who is a Jewish gay man, went to the same boarding school as Adolf Hitler. As far as we know, they didn't actually know each other, but they were literally at the boarding school at the same time in Vienna, Austria. Wittgenstein came from a very wealthy Austrian family at the time. people have speculated that Adolf Hitler may have felt some sort of way being raised about being, growing up near a bunch of wealthy Jewish people. I don't know. In any case, um, so he thought he basically cured philosophy, and then he had some friends within the community, within the philosophical community, come back and say, actually, we got some more questions. So he looked at that and kind of just threw aside everything he just did and wrote another book, which became the second most important book in all of philosophy, which is called Philosophical Investigations. The first one is called the Tractatus, or the longer form, the Tractatus Logicus Philosophicus, which is the Tractatus on logical philosophy. Uh, so like both of those books became like must reads for anyone who d- deemed himself worthy of doing philosophy. Um, so he's my second favorite. Uh, and my third favorite is W.V.O. Quine, or Willett Van Orman Quine. He was an important analytic philosopher who started off as a logical positivist and instead became a radical empiricist. Like he basically believed all knowledge is empirical. He shot down a lot of ideas in philosophy that most people consider just to be like true. He was like this. He was like the cowboy of analytic philosophy. Like propositions, those aren't real. Boom. The mind, that's not real. Boom. Like he was that guy. He was a philosopher's philosopher, as was Wittgenstein, as was Plato. I kind of like the best of the best. Um, he, he headed a whole school of philosophy that changed the track of philosophy as well, swinging back from people who were more into the Kantian idealism and rationalism that most of knowledge could be founded on uh, a priori knowledge, or knowledge without experience. So he kind of changed that. A lot of the work he did in math and logic ended up being used in computer science as well. You're gonna see a common thread there. So he's my third favorite philosopher. And if if there's another, and if I was gonna say there's a fourth, those are my favorite three. But if I was gonna say a fourth, I would say Jerry Fodor, who's like one of the co-founders of cognitive science, along with Noam Chomsky. He basically gave us a a good sketch of how the mind actually works, at least from a classical interpretation of cognitive science. He recently died, which is sad. I was hoping to meet him one day. He used to teach at Rutgers University. Um, Quine taught at Harvard, but he died in 2000. So right when I started philosophy, he passed away. So that sucked. Fodor passed away about 6 years ago, something like that. So he'll be my fourth favorite. So those are my favorites. Just to recap: Plato, um, Ludwig Wittgenstein, Willett Van Quine, and Jerry Fodor. Holomini says, "Homeboy, what are your thoughts on God's existence? Do you find it consistent? What are your thoughts on the watchmaker analogy?" So that's a thought, that is a topic for another day, and I actually did address that in the previous live stream. We can talk about it again another day, but I want to stick strictly on ethics. I don't want to veer too far into um, metaphysics unless it's touching on ethics, and I don't want to veer too far in epistemology unless that veers on ethics as well. Um, Nor do I want to veer too far off in some of these other philosophical branches, right? I want to kind of stay here in ethics. I want to just concentrate on the question: what do you guys think would be the best ethical theories for us to live by? And I broke down the five major camps within ethics, like deontology, um, descriptive ethics, consequentialism, virtue ethics, and divine command theory. Okay. And to answer someone earlier, Stoicism, I think Stoicism falls more under virtue ethics, but it depends. It can also fall under, um, it can arguably also fall under like a descriptive sort of ethics, or maybe a deontology. Deontology means like duty ethics. Like what is it your duty to do? Like so. Paul Mooney says Jamal recognizes gays because he himself is gay. I don't know. First of all, I don't know what the big cut up with that is. The funny thing is, I thought it. I come from an era where we used to make those sort of jokes all the time, but I thought that was not the good thing to do anymore on social media. So whatever. The only reason I don't have mods right now is because this isn't a super chat. Once I have a super chat, there will be moderators. For right now, the only people who moderates right now will be my wife when it's like enough people, and she just likes sitting in just to hear me like conversing with people. Honestly, she's one of the few people who think I'm smart, so I don't want to disappoint her. um, but no, it's such a small, intimate chat. It is the mods aren't necessary because the chat room will waver anywhere from 1 to like 30 people, so it really doesn't need a moderator. But with the super chats, I'll definitely need probably 1 or 2 moderators to keep things on board. Extra ketchup says, and wisdom, self control. Nick says, I'm like, I bet you're at Diddy's right now. Shoot, I don't think even Diddy is at the Diddy party anymore. But yeah, dude, you have what? You're saying I message you? I've, you know, I would ban you, but I'd rather you just keep lying and roast yourself. Like you're obviously an incel because only incels even reference things like Grinder. Like I have a whole wife, and this and this Negro is talking about stuff like that. And I don't even think, and honestly, I don't even think you're black. I think you're using that little icon to pretend you're black. I think you're some little white incel weirdo in somebody's basement. But carry on. You will get banned eventually if I decide that you're annoying people in the chat room. Because I don't. For me, you're not going to offend me. But once you start annoying other people in the chat room, then I'll ban you. Yep, he said, yep, it was Zeno, not Xenon. Zeno, yeah. Only friends says chat tripping. Yeah, they'll get banned. Like I said, if they annoy you guys, I'll ban them. If you guys say ban these ban these trolls, I'll ban them. Because like I said, they don't bother me, but if they bother you guys, I'll ban them. Yeah, they are kind of bringing down the convo. So here we go. I'm still hearing fireworks. I don't know about. Well, I know you not. Only for instance, you're in Thailand. Are fireworks even legal over there? But yeah, I'm still hearing fireworks. Been hearing it since July. Well, my with my grandmother, where I'm at right now. Well, I'm taking care of her. Um, I've been hearing them for like several days, but over in the other neighborhood, about 5 minutes away, they've been using them since June, maybe May. Uh, Leo Clark says, "What's behind you?" It's a plaque of my grandfather's when he served in the Korean War. Nick Allen says Sun Jian is historically a descendant of Sun Tzu. I'll look into it, but like I said, Nick, from what I've understood, Sun Tzu was more of a either a pen name or just a name used collectively by a bunch of writers, sort of like like with the Bible, um, like under certain writers, like with this, like the first four books of the Old Testament, the Torah, are all attributed to Moses, but we know now that assuming Moses actually existed, which is dubious, but assuming he did exist, those four books weren't actually written by him. And the Gospels, the first, the Gospels in the New Testament, this is the Gospel according to Matthew, the Gospel according to Saint John, and so forth. Like all of those are attributed to those apostles, but um, biblical scholars have noted that those aren't actually the people who wrote those gospels. So sort of the same thing with like the Art of War by Sun Tzu and stuff like that. I think what might be more like more realistic martial philosophy might be like the Book of Five Rings by Miyamoto Musashi. That was actually written by him, allegedly. Another one is banned. Yeah, they're spamming. I'm not even paying attention to them. Asher Ketchup says psycho cybernetics is based on self confidence, has nothing to do with Neuralink. If that's the case, then yeah, that's just hogwash. Like that's not how the mind works. For I mean, and this is coming from someone who's a mental realist. As a mental realist, I do believe that our thoughts and beliefs do actually determine our behavior. Uh, but self confidence is not going to change. Like it's not going to innervate your body in itself. Like that's just not how the mind works. For the nuts, I'll just say that a lot of our thoughts, beliefs, desires, so forth are um, and other intentional we call those internal mental states, or excuse me, yeah, um, internal mental states, or um, at they're all put it this way, they're all mental representations, right? Mental representations are symbols that can be manipulated by the mind for the purposes of knowledge. So, and we see thoughts and all these other sorts of intentional mental states as sort of like sentences encoded in the brain. And these sentences encoded in the brain are defined over mental processes that run like computer programs. That's how. That's roughly how the mind works, and that's roughly how mere mental states can be both intentional and you know intentional and representational, but also cause actual behavior in the real world. So outside of that, the psycho-cybernetics as you're describing it sounds very dubious. But let's kind of get back to ethics, because that where that can fall into certain ethical thoughts, thought experiments, that's not particularly ethics itself. And we can talk about philosophy of mind or philosophy of psychology another day. Uh, Extra Catcher says, I read the book based on what the author calls divine discontent. You should look into it. I haven't heard of divine discontent. That's interesting. June McDowell says, I wish more of you enunciated this well. I? Um, Mooly Fern says, like, share, and subscribe, and buy my army friend a coffee. Please, guys, I do buy me a coffee. I literally drank some coffee right before this live stream just so I could have the energy to stay up to do this because it's kind of late. I get up very early. Ideally I like to get up 4:30, and which is great during the summer because that gets me to beat the heat. Because it was like 90 degrees alone, and then it was like 97 with the humidity. So Extra Ketchup says Special K. That book changed my life. Dead ass. I have not heard of this, guys. I haven't heard of that book. Now I can give you I can give you some classic ethical books to read, of course, like Meditations on First Philosophy and um, some other things. But yeah, Muller Fern says 50 likes, I'll skull a whole bottle. Y'all heard the man. Y'all heard Muller Fern. He says 50 likes. Let's go. I don't know what that I don't know what that means, Samantha. I hope that's a good thing. I don't know what those two emojis together mean. Speaking of emojis, let me just go on a tangent for a second. Do people remember before we called them emojis, we used to call them emoticons? Do anyone remember that? Emoji was actually the Japanese word for it, and then for some reason we all started using the word emoji over emoticons, but we used to call these little pictures emoticons back in the day. What's up, Eric? I haven't heard from you in a while, my friend. What's up? Molin Fern says, I was studying computer science at Assumption University in Bangkok. Oh, for real? Uh, how was it? Like, how was it going to a school at a foreign university? Because I've considered doing that in the Philippines. The problem being, of course, I would have to take something relating to either English or something very English related, like philosophy or maybe just math, because a lot of the stuff is going to be taught in Taglish. Taglish is like Tagalog and English blended together, because most Filipinos in their conversations today, they won't speak pure Tagalog, and they'll mix it with English, and it's called Taglish. And I'm pretty sure that both the students and the professors will have their lectures often in sort of Taglish. So unless I'm probably taking like maybe a master's in English literature or a master's in philosophy, or maybe taking something like math where it doesn't even matter, it probably be very limited unless I go to like a very top tier university in the Philippines. And I don't want to go. I don't feel the need to go to like University of Philippines Dillman or Far East University, which is some of their best schools, right? Just to do like a little master's. But I have thought about doing that over there, and there was a university even right near my condo when I lived in Mandaluyong, which is a city in Metro Manila. There was literally like university within walking distance out, and one of my wife's friends was actually going there. So I've considered going there. I asked her friend about it. She said I probably could do it if they, it, only if it was like English, because most of the classes were taught in Tagalog. So curious how that went for you. So we got some British cornball, and no diss to most British people, but yeah, this dude's a British cornball. Why don't you go eat some beans over toast and leave the grown folks to this conversation. Special K said I always found some parts of Mussolini's early life interesting, mainly that he was kicked out of school after stabbing a handful of classmates, but in his 20s became a teacher himself. I did not know that. So that sounds like he had a history of psychopathy. And for you guys who weren't in my live stream when we discussed stuff like that, I was someone was asking me what is psychopathy and what's the difference between that and a sociopath. This is not dealing with ethics, but just in case people are curious. And I was saying there's actually a bit of um, disagreement within the mental health world of psychotic uh, disorders like psychopathy and sociopathy. Some people think they're basically the same thing. It's just the sociopathy became the more um, used word going into the 90s and 2000s. Now to switch back to psychopath. Um, but amongst others, and I'm one of those people who are the so-called others, we think there's a distinction where that psychopathy is more or less an innate mental disease that something you're born with and may get triggered sometime early in life, because we tend to see people who are psychopaths early on in life being diagnosed with things like um ob, ob, what do you call it, child def, def, uh, defiant disorder, child defiant disorder, or whatever. Basically, these are kids that don't care about other kids' feelings, don't respond to authority, don't respect elders, stuff like that. And these are the sort of kids you'd be like, oh yeah, that you see that sort of kid, and you look at him like, oh yeah, he's gonna be in jail when he becomes an adult. So those kids with the operant defiant disorder, child operant defiant disorder, however is classified, those tend to be the people who are later diagnosed as psychopaths. Okay, sociopaths, on the other hand, tend to be um, it seems to be more of a learned thing. Like it may still like it's probably still a genetic predisposition to it. However, it's not something that you see throughout the person's life. There's usually some sort of trigger which leads to it. So I always give the example of the Joker versus Harley Quinn. Joker is a psychopath. Like he was just born that way. He was always off his rocker. Whereas Harley Quinn, it took a severe trigger. When the Joker threw her into a vat of acid to trigger her mental breakdown, her psychosis. That's the difference. Other than that, they don't represent the average psychopath or sociopath. Most psychopaths are not violent, by the way. The key the key trait amongst all psychopaths is their lack of empathy for others. That is one of the key traits of a psychopath. However, they tend to be very successful in the fields that they go into, which is often the business world or things related to that, because you psychopaths can, for obvious reasons, thrive in the corporate world. Hell surprise, right? But um, yeah, most psychopaths aren't violent, nor are s- most sociopaths, however, can display. I think, like I said, one of the differences between a psychopath and sociopath is one is learned and one is innate, and which means a sociopath may display some levels of empathy, whereas a psychopath will only pretend to have empathy for others, just so they can use them. And psychopaths tend to also have overlapping traits with narcissistic personality disorder, and they may be diagnosed comorbidly with both. Um, the thing about people with like narcissistic personality disorder or psychopaths, as opposed to maybe sociopaths, is that psychopaths tend. One of the things about them is they tend to be very charismatic. So think Ted Bundy and other folks, right? So anyway, off of that, let's get back to ethics and only ethics. um, Moonlit Friends says, okay, special K, but explain, please. Yeah, because the whole Mussolini thing was a little off, but that's why I wanted to get into the whole psychopath thing. No way Philly is making a joke. Vaughn, three thumbs up. I appreciate the three thumbs up, but can you also hit a like on the video too? I would very much appreciate it. Thank you. Moonlit Furnace says, well, the generation has changed. In just my opinion, they have low attention spans and stare at screens. No, they genuinely have. I mean, in behavioral research, we're actually now talking about the TikTok effect that people, because of the way social media algorithms do things, have shorter attention spans. Another point of that, and this is for you who either have little kids or plan on having little kids, don't sit your little kids in front of digital screens before the age of 6. At the age of 6, your a child's brain is still going through what's called neural pruning, and putting them in front of a digital screen for long amounts of time will screw that up, and they will end up having some attentional deficits. It won't necessarily lead to ADHD, but they will have attentional deficits. And this is not just coming from me as a nobody. This 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 warning comes through the APA, the American Psychiatric Association, the other APA, the American Psychological Association, the APS, the Association for Psychological Science, and the other APA, the American Pediatric Association. So all four of those groups, who are much wiser, much knowledgeable than me, are all telling you, do not put little kids, especially below the ages of 6 years old, in front of digital screens, because it will cause them attentional deficits. This is why we're seeing kids with low attention spans, and also letting them use social media, which feed the algorithm feeds the constant content, short like short clip content. Even on YouTube, the YouTube Shorts, it's like that. The TikTok thing, or Instagram, or some aspects of Facebook, right? With the Facebook Reels, or Snapchat. Those are detrimental to a young person's mind. That's what's causing the low attention spans. Like, you think a kid will be able to sit and watch a movie made in the 70s? Uh-uh. They won't even sit and watch a movie today. Like, they'll literally go to a movie or sit in front of a TV and just be on their phone the whole time. This is why you have to have warnings now in the theater saying, please put your phone away. Right? So, special case for horses, says Moon. I find it says something about him as a person, because aside from the stabbings, he was in general an unruly and defiant student, but he still chose to be a teacher, which is a position of influence and power. Well, again, like I said, Special K, the fact that he likely would have been diagnosed with 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 juvenile operant defiant disorder, is usually that is usually a precursor to adult psychopathy. Okay, and usually very charismatic leaders like that are psychopaths. So more than likely, Mussolini was a psychopath. Adolf Hitler was a psychopath. Many of these cult leaders are psychopaths, right? And like I said, the key trait of psychopaths and probably also of people with narcissistic personality disorder, and like I said, the two illnesses usually are comorbid with each other, is their absolute lack of empathy for others. So, but that doesn't really tend to do with anything dealing with ethics. Oh, and I know you guys thought I forgot. I always give you what I promise. So here's the very worst theory of ethics, so we can just move this out of the way. And some of you probably never even heard of it. It's called ethical egoism. Most of us, so there's psychological egoism and then there's ethical egoism. Psychological egoism is just the fact in behavioral science that people will do what's in their best self-interest, generally speaking, because obviously people don't always do what's in their best self-interest, but generally speaking, all things being equal, or ceteris, or like most scientific laws, comes with a ceteris paribus clause, or all other things being considered equal, people generally do what is in their best self-interest. That is psychological egoism, but that has led some misguided ethicists to develop ethical egoism. And ethical egoism is basically the position that what is what is ethical or moral for us to do is whatever is to act in our best self-interest. Obviously, that's not the case. If we all acted in only in our self-interest, society would crumble. We can't make that a thing that everyone can do what's in their self-interest and society just go along co- in a civilized, cohesive manner. Actually, it's called and it's also sometimes called the three E's, which are the worst ethical theories. So there's ethical egoism, there's existentialism as a moral theory, not as a um, not as a metaphysics, but as an ethical theory. Existentialism is shit. Ethical egoism is shit. And the last one of the ethical ease, which also sucks, is I believe is ethical subjectivism. Let me get let me let me do a little double check on that, guys. But that was a running joke in my ethics classes about the three bad ethic theories, and it was like those three that I just mentioned. Mm, but yeah, I think it was ethical egoism, ethical existentialism, and ethic. Mm, was it ethical subjectivism? I'll double check on that. But yeah, of the three, the worst one was ethical egoism, definitely. And the way affiliate says Thailand when there are no winners or losers. Funny. We can say the ancient kingdom of Siam, if you rather. Moonlit Fern says, yeah, Thai celebrates American New Year, Chinese New Year, and Thai New Year's, and I highly recommend experiencing Thai New Year's Songkran Festival. I do want to come back for the Songkran Festival. It's funny that some people come there during the Songkran Festival and they don't know, so they get mad at all these people squirting water at them. And I'm like, that's your fault. You're supposed to do your homework when you travel. My wife and I, like, we always do our due diligence and know when we go into a country, things to avoid and things to look for when we come to another country. So we know all the scams that they do in a given country when we come there, so we can avoid those, like like the tuk-tuk scams that they do in Thailand, right? We knew about those. We knew how to avoid that. Um, but people will during a Songkran festival and get mad they get squirted up, and you know how some people have the actually squirt dye in those water guns, so they get mad. And I'm like, if you did your research, you would have known you're coming during a Songkran festival, so don't go outside wearing expensive clothing because you're gonna get shot with water, and it's all fun and love. But if you want to avoid that, just don't come to Thailand at that time. It's not. It's like I don't know why people get so upset about it. It's like it would be like coming to America, on July the 4th and being mad that you are you're seeing and hearing fireworks everywhere. It's like you should have did your research coming to America knowing people were gonna be lighting fireworks everywhere. So I said Moonlit Frenzy, yeah, fireworks amongst fire shows. So it is legal then. That's all I was wondering was would a fireworks actually legal? My man said, "Give me a thumbs up and a smile on camera, and I will sub." I don't perform for you, my friend. I do smile a lot, but I'm not willing to perform. If you want me to do a thumbs up and a smile, drop a cash app. I don't perform for you. I have a real job in real life. When my friend says like, subscribe, either way, as long as you enjoy the community. And the Yavesky 904 says, are you saying people think in words? In a matter of speaking, yes, absolutely. So this is one of the big things that Jerry Fodor had uncovered. And mind you, he'll even tell you this is not something he discovered. He was basically just taking from a lot of other big thinkers and made uh, just a more contemporary understanding of the mind, which became sort of the bedrock of cognitive science, along with what Noam Chomsky did with turning linguistics into an actual science. Because before, the closest we had to a scientific linguistics before Noam Chomsky was structuralism. And I don't want to go into that whole thought of structuralism and stuff like that. But by the way, that was my third major. For guys that don't know, I did a triple major in college. I'm a nerd, guys. I'm a nerd. But um, so in his theory, we call it the computational representational theory of thought. Um, and my own philosopher expanded on it and also gave us the computational representational theory of qualia as well. I won't get into qualia today, but yes. So Jerry Fodor and others thought that and that's pun intended, thought that our thoughts and other um, um, intentional mental states were sentential in nature. Not all of them. Some 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 of our thoughts and beliefs and desires are imagistic. They are, and you can actually do neural studies where you can see there's a topographic representation of certain things along our mind. Like you can actually look at layers within the brain, the mind brain, and see representations of things, like visual representations of things by the parts of the neural circuitry that light up for certain images and stuff like that. However, when we think about these things, even even when we think about things, we tend to still have a sentential representation of it. So here's a quick way to to appreciate that, okay, Andy? So if I tell you right now, think of a zebra, I'll say no. Close your eyes. Just think of a zebra. All right, open your eyes. Now, when you thought of a zebra, I'm sure you imagined something that looks like a horse with black and white stripes, right? Yes, you did. However, tell me that when you thought of the actual animal that is a zebra, that there wasn't also some sort of mental caption somewhere that also said zebra as you thought of the image of a zebra. There's all So we always think there's going to be some sort of sentential representation in all our thinking, in our cogitation, so to speak, right? And that's because we think that thoughts are sen- sentences embedded in in the brain, and basically in a sort of syntactical logical structure similar to first order logic, and that these sentential these sententious these sentential representations are then defined over these computational like processes in the brain, which allows us to basically use just churn them out. If we think of something similar to like a Turing tape, which a Turing tape was sort of like the precursor to the modern computer. So that's that's now considered the classical theory of the theory of mind, because there are others that have come along that have tried to challenge it. There was rivals that thought that thoughts should be imagistic only. There was one, and it was very unconvincing, but I have read the book about it that said that thoughts should be map like representations, because of like what I just described, that you can get certain images in your head that will elicit a topographic representation within the mind. But again, all of that seems to be sentential in nature when we're actually doing conscious, whether we're doing conscious or unconscious thinking about things. Um, and we think that this will but on a very physical look at this, we think this will probably come through some sort of parallel distributed processing. Okay, and we can get into that more specifically in another time. But I wanted to be about talk about ethics, not philosophy of mind. More than, for instance, when it comes to visas, you can have a 1 year visa called a digital nomad visa. I ended up with a gemology degree. That's right. You did tell me you were studying gemology. That's right. I do remember that. Study of precious stones and metals, which is how we also got into our talk about why precious metals can be a good asset for folks who want to buffer their um, their investments, like their investment portfolio. Precious metals should probably be a good asset to add to one's investment portfolio, and they can, not to mention, having precious metals on hand can be useful in times of crises, or when you're traveling to unsafe countries as a buffer against, you know, maybe some corruption in the law or having issues with customs, stuff like that. Katarina Bison just as I subbed and like, thank you, Katarina, and welcome to the group. BSK is back. BSK says great opportunities in law. So guys, I'm surprised no one's asked me this, or at least since I haven't gone all the way down in the chat yet. But I'm surprised no one asked me what is my preferred ethical theory. I will reveal that shortly, but I want to get through the comments first, okay? Moonlit Furnace says, real talk, I think you should be my therapist when our wifeys meet. uh, I don't think I could be anyone's therapist just because I have my own issues. Like, I deal with clinical depression, and I don't think therapists who have their own psychological struggles may be the best to work with others because it can lead to them having a meltdown because, of projection and all that sort of stuff. But anyway, I've learned very early on after taking a class in clinical psychology, and then taking a class in helping skills, which actually which was an actual lab. So the lab was actually doing therapy with people, with other students on a low level. Like, obviously, if they actually had like some really troubling issues, we would have referred them to our professors who would have told them, found them professional help. But even still, we did get to actually practice therapeutic helping skills, which I have used from time to time. Special case says, I feel like a lot of people confuse the way the traits of some on the spectrum works with how a psychopath acts and function. Well, so yeah, I don't want to get into psychopathology today. I've done that in another live stream, and we can do that again in a different one. But I want to stick with ethics. Not, yes, there are, of course, there's some overlap with talking about mental health and ethics. This is why there's the whole field in psychology called moral psychology, which is also there's a field of study in ethics now, which is based in behavioral research, which is like this dealing in descriptive ethics or ethical behavior, stuff like that. So I don't we can get into like moral psychology and ethical behavior, but I don't want to go down the road of talking about mental health illnesses because that's a somewhat rather unrelated topic. Okay. Moment Furnace says, preach it. Notice how everything you watch clicks to a different view every 3 to 4 seconds. Any advert or commercial. Yeah, that's intentional. That's intentional. Because it's feeding a constant. It's like a drug. It's they know what they're doing. And these tech giants who come before Congress and act so innocent about the damage that their content is doing, they're being very they're being very disingenuous because they know exactly what they're doing with those algorithms, and they like the fact that these people are so old in Congress that they don't understand what the problem is with these things, that they have to rely on their interns and clerks to actually get them to understand how toxic these social media algorithms are. And I know the irony of me saying that while I'm on one of these platforms, but I think these live chats are these long form contents don't fall under that so much as the YouTube shorts, which I do sometimes, the Facebook Reels, the Instagrams, the TikToks. Not very healthy, and I would say, like I said, if you have a young child or you plan on having one, please do not let them stare at these screens under the age of 6 years old, or your kid will have attentional problems later on. And again, that doesn't come from me. That comes from the American Pediatric Association, the American Psychological Association, the American Psychiatric Association, and the Association for Psychological Science, and I believe also the American Medical Association. So, J.A.C says, "Yeah, my kids expect instant gratification while watching a movie when you can YouTube the climax of the movie." Now, you know what I'll do sometimes after a movie, especially if I'm watching like a foreign film or just like a really old movie. What I will do after I watch the movie is I'll go online and I'll look up the synopsis of the movie, and I'll look at the conclusion, because sometimes the conclusion won't be very well understood. Like I thought I understood 2001: A Space Odyssey, but I wanted to verify that I saw what I saw. So I did, go online, and I don't know if I went to either Wikipedia or to I forgot the site for movies, but I looked at how it explained the conclusion, because I also read the book. So I did. I have I've saw 2001 when I was a kid, but didn't really understand it because I was literally a little kid. However, I watched 2010, the sequel to 2001, when I was a kid, and that gave me some grasp because I watched both. But it wasn't until I was an adult that I read the book. And so I went and rewatched the movie, the original movie 2001, to understand it better. And I was like, yeah, I still don't understand. It's like I understood what happened in the book with what happened to the guy at the very end, but I had to actually read a synopsis of the ending to just make it more construct like so. That I don't have any problem with when people do that. Like, when people watch like videos on YouTube explaining the end of a show or end of a movie. That's cool because at least you actually watch the movie. Presume, although some people will actually watch those videos on YouTube and then go watch the show, which kind of defeats the purpose. But I don't have any problem with watching those videos on YouTube that explains the endings of movies and what happened after you actually watched it. GJC says, was Tony Soprano's mother narcissistic disorder or borderline personality? Excuse me, borderline personality disorder. Actually, remember his therapist. I think his therapist actually described her problem. I don't remember, but she was definitely a narcissist. But see, so here's the thing. This is probably one of the things why they in the DSM-5, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, that they stopped calling personality disorders disorders, although most of us still consider them disorders. So often it's the case that men are described as narcissists and women are described as having histrionic personality. They're very similar, but they're just it seems to have they have gendered the disorders. Like a narcissist is typically considered a male, where someone who's histrionic is more likely considered a woman because it comes from the word hysteria or hysterical, which had always been, referring to women because the hysteria referred to, female, female genitalia. So histrionic personality disorder might be more what Tony Soprano's mother might have displayed, but it's not always black and white because, like I said, some people, because there's a lot of overlapping symptoms with a lot of disorders, they may have one or the other, or they might be diagnosed with both, because it is often the case that very disturbed people have comorbid illnesses. For instance, I would say many, if not most, people with substance abuse issues also have some comorbid psychological disorder as well. Well, I mean, substance abuse disorder is considered a mental disorder, but it's often diagnosed with another mental health disorder along with it, like clinical depression or some sort of anxiety disorder. So Tony Soprano's mother, I think she could be considered narcissistic personality disorder or histrionic disorder or even borderline personality disorder. Borderline personality disorder is someone who's like somewhere between a psychopath and someone who's like clinically depressed. And then you even have schizoaffective disorder. So she definitely had her issues. All, all his both his parents did, and his uncle Junior, and he himself did. Um, Tony was clearly I would argue, looking at the prequel they did to The Sopranos, where they showed him as a teenager. Yeah, I would say he was probably a psychopath himself. So, and mental illnesses do run in families, which is one of the reasons we know now that mental health illnesses are like like uh, all traits, partly hereditary. So, special case for horses says also just don't leave a kid in front of an iPad at all, because if the algorithm tends to suggest and show provocative content and to a young mind, combining the attention deficit with that is a danger. Yes. So someone, uh, special cases with ethics, I find there's an overwhelming societal expectation for you to consider ethics with simple actions like, oh, now I'm not supposed to use straws, go to certain restaurants, or order from Timu. So, all right, you get into an important distinction we need to make, which is made in ethics. So, there is people who aren't trained in ethics or moral theory or whatever tend to confuse three things with morality. They confuse morality with social norms and with what they find personally distasteful. Just because you find something personally distasteful does not make it unethical. Just because something goes against societal norms doesn't make it unethical, or immoral. More or less, did whatever we can look past all the different ethical theories and say that generally, which means not always, but most of the time, generally, for something to be immoral, it has to cause intentional harm to others, or them to either, it has to cause intentional harm to either oneself or others. Okay. Breaking a societal norm is not necessarily unethical, although something may be both a societal norm and a moral practice, right? Um, Something that's personally distasteful may be unethical, but not necessarily so. You just may not find it a tasteful thing to do. And we can kind of, law might be a fourth bracket, but I would just put that under societal norms. But the law, what is legal, is not necessarily ethical as well, although sometimes it is, which gets into um, uh, le- legal ethics or whatever. But I would just classify that as a subset of societal norms. So, so here's an example. So, um, interracial marriage wasn't a societal norm for a long time. Still, in many places, isn't. That doesn't make it unethical. All right. Um, People who fall under the LGBTQ, Q, I, 2S PAA. Yes, I know all the letters. Only because I looked it up. And for some of them, there's also an M, but whatever. In any case, people who fall under that, we might find it personally distasteful what they do, and in some places it may also break societal norm and be against the law. But there's nothing intrinsically unethical about it as long as it's done between consenting adults. All right. Now, what would be immoral would be then going out to delete those folks because we don't like what they do. That is immoral because we're causing undue harm on others. So a lot of people in society can't distinguish their personal distaste from what is ethical, and they can't distinguish what is societal norms from what is ethical. Okay. Unimine oh 06 question says question, where does your morality stand on this next election? It's not an ethical question for me. It's a question on my political views. This that got into what I exactly said and just now about distinguishing moral from societal norms from personal distaste. We may not agree with how people vote, but that doesn't mean make it unethical. We need to sharp and distinct. Sorry, I just my Wi-Fi just reconnected, guys. Hope you all still here. If not, sorry. But um, we we need to make a sharp distinction between what is moral, what is merely a societal norm, and what is merely personal distasteful. Like my professor said in one of my classes, so I ended up taking two ethics classes. One was like one for like the general student, another one specifically for like serious philosophy students. So he gave a distinction between what is personally distasteful but not unethical. He said like if he's I think he said he saw some kid when he was younger giving a giving a dog red rockets or whatever. If you don't know what red rockets is, I'm not going to describe it here. Go ahead and Google it. And he was like, "Well, he said, well, he said, where I might find that disgusting, I can't say there was anything unethical about it." And he said, "It seems the dog enjoyed it." So we should try to make a distinction between what is distasteful for us, what is merely breaking a societal norm, and what is truly immoral. And like I said, the easiest, but not always the easiest, but maybe the clearest way to get at that is it causing unharm due to others? If not, then we're probably looking at merely a societal norm, a legal proscription, right? Or something that we just find personally disgusting. There's a lot of things I find personally disgusting, but I wouldn't call it unethical. I think eating calamari is disgusting, but I'm not going to say people are immoral because they like calamari. So now, if you force me to eat calamari, then that would be immoral because you're causing undue harm to me by forcing me to eat something I find disgusting. Get it? Liam McMara says ethics and morality is dictated by those in control. So you're getting into another aspect, Liam, of ethics. That is not ethics. So what you're talking about is um, when we get into like philosophy of law and um, what we call moral ethical legalism. Ethical legalism is the view that whatever falls under law is what is ethical. That is a highly dubious ethical theory, ethical legalism, which is the thought that whatever falls under the law is legal. Because obviously we've seen so many cases of that in the history of the world where things have been legal which are completely unethical, and things that are illegal are completely ethical. Case in point, slavery. it was it was legal not here just in America, but in most of the world throughout most of human civilization. But did that make it ethical? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. On the other hand, whereas slavery on one hand is a form of if looking at ethical legalism as being something as a downright contradiction to that. On the other hand, you also had things that were illegal, but which were very much ethical to do. So, if you are hiding Jewish stowaways in your attic, and Nazis come looking for them, and you say they're not there, you're abetting criminals, right? But you're doing the ethical thing. Not only that, it also shows a distinction between telling the truth and honesty. They're not necessarily synonymous, but we don't have to go that deep into it. It's just a those were just two examples of why ethical legalism don't work as ethics, and why even those who are in control can prescribe ethical legalism, but that doesn't mean we have to buy that. The fact that we can live in Western nations and challenge those assumptions and ideas gives us an edge up on those living in other places that I can't mention in this disparaging manner on YouTube. I can mention one of them, North Korea, right? But I'm not going to mention its neighbor. But um, because also I want to visit there too, so I won't say anything disparaging about them here online. But yeah, uh, ethical legalism is a failed theory of ethics. So we don't even have to consider that. C.J. Johnson says, "So are we immoral for being meat eaters?" Well, according to Peter Singer, we are. If you don't know who Peter Singer is, he kind of led the animal liberation movement back in the 70s. He's the author of that book, and it became sort of the Bible for people who went into things like PETA and veganism. I was a vegan in college. Don't blame me. I think we all did a lot of weird things in college. Smoked weed, became vegan. I'm talking about myself here. Was a you know a very dyed in the wool blue progressive. Um, uh, and other weird things I did in college. That's not even thought think about that because that'll just lead us into a different subject. But are we are we necessarily so so we should put the qualifier, are we necessarily immoral for being meat eaters? No. So now here's the thing. So most people say, well, a lot of animals are carnivores. They're not immoral. And so then the rejoinder to that would be, yes, but they don't have the capacity for reason that humans do to realize what they're doing is wrong, and to also have the capability to find other ways to eat that don't involve meat. So that will be the rejoinder. However, here's the thing. When we when we harvest animals for the purposes of eating meat, we're not doing it with in, with intentional harm. We're not doing it with to cause undue harm to animals. We're doing it merely for survival. Also, we biologically we are better served as omnivores. Now we've come to a point where scientific labs are developing lab meat, which means we could actually produce animal meat products without actually killing animals anymore. We're almost to that point. So if we get to the point where we can make just porterhouse steaks and buckets of Kentucky Fried Chicken without ever having to harvest any animals in the process, then we might have to revisit that question: are we necessarily immoral for being meat eaters? Because now we're at a point where we never have to even hurt an animal to do so. But I don't think we're at that point yet. And because animals themselves aren't moral agents, it's highly dubious that we can be immoral towards animals if they're not moral agents themselves. Some say they are. Some might argue they are. Some might only say some animals have moral agency, others don't. That is a question outside of our current question here. But I'll answer that by saying we're not necessarily immoral for being the meat eaters. Only way I would see us being, or some people being, necessarily immoral for meat eating is not hunt. And by the way, no, not hunters. I know you might think, yeah, well, hunters must be. No. At least they're actually more honest about what they do. They're actually going out to harvest the animals themselves, which then they go eat, right? Whereas we just have a few buffers in between, like the slaughterhouse and the market and so forth, that come to us, but we're still in that chain of events that led to the animal's death, right? In any case, neither us nor hunters we are necessarily immoral for meat eaters. Only ones I would say who are necessarily immoral for meat eaters would, for excuse me, for eating meat, would be people who go out of their way to actually illegally kill animals for the fun of it and then eat them. So like some so some of these some of these people who go out and kill um the, so a case for when it is immoral to eat meat would be these people who go out to hunt animals who are um who what do they call them, that are close to extinction, and they often go hunting for them, illegally in other countries, and then they'll sell this illegally in wet markets, and they call it exotic meat or whatever, and sometimes this actually leads to pathogens leading to illnesses with us, like maybe the COVID, what was actually a bat-borne pathogen. So there's still the rivalry between it. Was it a Wuhan lab leak, or was it a, a bat pathogen which made its way to people through a wet market? Because in some of those wet markets, people do kill exotic animals, just for the purposes of being able to eat them. That is immoral. Like if you're killing exotic animals just for the sheer thrill of eating exotic animals, especially animals that are close to extinction, when there's no need to do so, then that is immoral. But the average person who eats meat, no, they're not being immoral. Sorry for the long answer to that, but I hope you understood that. Liam McMahon says there's a slippery slope, no way to honestly do that. True. Uh, he's referring to what we just talked about earlier, guys, not the meat thing. Special case for horses says, do you think Joe Biden being put in his position counts as unethical? I'm not sure what you mean by his position. You mean being allowed to still run for office despite showing mental decline, if that's what you're asking? Um, I'm not sure. So one thing I'll never do is I'm not gonna make up an answer just to say that I can answer something. Honestly, I'm not sure. Can a case be made that the people within his circle are doing him a disservice by letting him run for office, the most powerful office in the world, despite knowing that he's going through an obvious mental decline that everyone now can see? Um, you could say it's unethical. I don't think Joe Biden is being unethical. I would think the people in his administration and the people in the DNC would be being unethical, knowing that this man is in mental decline and still allowing him to proceed anyway. Those are the people I would find unethical. I just find to be probably deluded, but being deluded doesn't make you unethical. Like I said, if I found anyone to be unethical in that whole scenario, it is his handlers, and it is the people, and it's all the political pundits on the left who want this guy to run for office despite him being in mental decline. Like I don't think it's good. I don't think that man running for office is good for him, nor is it for the country. So I wouldn't say Biden is unethical. I would say his handlers and the pundits in his circle are unethical in allowing him to run, knowing that he's probably not um, coherent enough, like lucid enough to be in that position. We should have learned that lesson with Ronald Reagan 40 years ago. Um, Now, has Joe Biden done some unethical things in the past? Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. But running for office a second term, I don't think is unethical in itself. I think his some of the things he's done in the past has been unethical, and I think the people around him who are allowing him to run, knowing that they don't have that may not be the best thing for him in his current mental decline. I think there's a good argument that they're being unethical. Okay. Lone Lone Wolf says the Bible says the borrower is a slave to the lender. You owe me, pay me. You owe me, pay me, or come wash these dishes. God didn't say we couldn't eat meat. Um, Jake McMahon, what's up, Jake? Get back. Says hello. He said you gonna trust that only God can create meat. So we're not coming this from religious perspective. Lone Wolves. Appreciate your comments, by the way. So that gets back into one of the five major camps of ethical theory that I described in the beginning of the chat, which is called divine command theory. And I said divine command theory within the realm of ethics is not well respected outside of people who are religious scholars because, like I said, Socrates himself defeated divine command theory himself over, 3,000 or plus years ago when he when he basically criticized this young guy for throwing his father to the he turned his father over to the authorities, and Socrates questioned on what justification he had to do so, and he gave this spiel about doing doing what's right by the gods and all this sort of stuff. And so Socrates, being the jerk that he is, said, "Well, that's interesting." He said, "Well, did the gods command what was pious, or do the gods merely follow what's pious and command us of us to do that?" And the guy couldn't answer. He was like, "Well, since you don't really know what is and isn't pious," he said, and of course I'm paraphrasing in our own way of talking just to make it more succinct. But this is not what Socrates said verbatim, obviously. But so Socrates basically says, so you turn your father over to the law based on your own subjective feelings about what was the right thing to do because you thought that it was a a man of God should do that sort of thing, but you don't know what actually the gods think is holy, or what is holy is what's actually commanded by the gods. Because if what is if anything that the gods command is holy or justified or moral, then we can follow any sort of commands whatsoever, whether they be evil or good or whatever. But as long as the gods command it is okay. And we know from the ancient Greek gods that they were not very moral beings. On the other hand, if the gods merely command what is already holy, then there's something above the gods themselves, and we don't really need to listen to what the gods command. We can just follow what is holy in itself, which stands above the gods. And the guy was like, "Well, yeah." He said, "Then you shouldn't have." He said, so Socrates basically said, "Then you were really not justified in turning your father over to the to the law, because you're basically just a jerk." And so the guy just like, "Well, yeah," couldn't answer him, then kind of stormed off. So, and again, I'm putting that in a contemporary context. It is worded a little bit differently, but it's basically just how I said it, more or less. Jake McMahon says, "I don't think we can ever create nutritious lab grown meat." No, they've actually been doing it. Like, they did it, and I think it was, and this was years ago, so I'm sure they're way ahead of the stuff that I read from like 6, 8 years ago. So they've grown some lab grown meat, and I think it had the texture and smell of like, I can't remember if it was like chicken or pork chops or something like that. And the scientists actually said this actually, they didn't eat it, but it was like, this actually smells kind of good. Like this seems tasty enough that we would probably try it. I think they should have had a taste tester though. I mean, lab grown meat can't be worse than spam. And no diss to all the people in Hawaii and the Philippines and in Arkansas to eat spam. But yeah, I can't imagine it being worse than spam. Or I don't even think spam is the worst. I think what's that stuff that everyone eats in Pennsylvania and in Maryland too. I used to eat as a little kid too, till I actually read the ingredients and found out what it was. Um, and you fry it. I forgot what it's called, but it's basically like the heart, the eyes, the the ears, the snout, everything that can't be called meat is called offal. This makes up this particular type of meat product. It can't be worse than that. I'm pretty sure the lab grown meat can't be worse than either spam nor the thing that I can't think of the name right now, but it's eaten very commonly in Pennsylvania and other parts of the Northeast. Lone Wolf says wasting meat is immoral. Um, it can be, not necessarily so. Like I said, being if being wasteful would cause undue harm to others, then it's immoral. So, like I said, this is how we break down immoral from what is just a breaking of societal norm or just something we find distasteful. Does it cause undue harm to oneself or others? If not, then it's probably not immoral. It's probably just breaking a societal norm, breaking a code of law, or just something we find personally distasteful. Obviously, for a lot of people, we would find it wasting food, whether it's meat or or vegetables or starches or fruit or whatever. We would find wasting food personally distasteful because there are a lot of people who can't afford to waste food, right? Now, however, if you are wasting food that could or should be going to others, then yes, that would be unethical. Liam McMahon says, I'd say you could debate that meat eating is immoral or moral based on the manner in which animals are killed, harvest, hunting versus plant. No, so um, So okay, so one of the things that turned me vegan a college student was actually viewing videos of the slaughterhouses. If you guys, eh, the cliche about don't see how the sausage is made, yeah, don't. So it those slaughterhouses are unethical, but on various factors. For one, they tend to hire illegal migrants to work in those places. Two, they tend to exploit those workers since they are undocumented immigrants. They can basically exploit them. And three, the 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 way they harvest the animals tends to be very unhygienic and or very cruel to the animals themselves. You can harvest animals in a more humane manner. So the manner in which animals are killed can be unethical, um, just just the act of culling animals for the sake of attaining their meat isn't in itself immoral. Jake McMahon says, "Do you believe in objective morality?" Sorry if you already answered it. No, I didn't already answer that. And like I said, I'm pretty sure people are curious actually what my ethical what what if any ethical theory I subscribe to, and I'm going to get into that. Do I believe in objective morality? Sort of. Okay. So, like I said, and you weren't here in the beginning. Like I said, the moral relativism is very common in academic circles. The problem with it being so widespread in academic circles is most people just take it as a given without actually looking at the arguments for and against it. But when you actually look at arguments for moral relativism, some of them are pretty solid. Like, it's hard to look at at anything itself in the world and say that is moral, that is immoral. Like, what in the observation of something can we classify it as moral and immoral in the same sense that we could like classify some sort of scientific datum, right? It is very hard, if not impossible, to do so. So morality might fall into that quasi relative field, or we might say it's domain relative. Domain relative means it's it's you know relative with outside of its domain. But there is a case for objective morality, but it doesn't come from law, it doesn't come from religion. Um, it doesn't come from logic. It comes from cognitive science. There's a guy, believe his name was the, the and I met him. I think his name is Mark Hauser. He wrote a book called Moral Minds. He basically gave the argument that just like with language learning, that all that language learning is innate in all humans because we all have an innate universal grammar that we're born with that gives us our prescriptive rules of syntax and um, semantics and stuff like that, which allows us to build upon that in any culture to make language. He argued for the same for morality, that we have a sort of innate moral grammar that we're all born with that leads to us all having different ethics within our given cultures. I, both neither I nor my professor in cognitive science exactly agree with him, but we did believe that he was on the right track. That there is something innate about morality, and that's the part that we can that is objective. Um, Another professor of mine also hinted on that too. He actually came up with a theory called folk-based practice consequentialism, um, and he basically said that our ethical theories and moral principles are all just very formalized ways of looking at innate moral prescriptions, which we all have. And if we look in cross cultural studies of moral psychology, al- almost every, if not every, culture has the same universal moral taboos against things like uh, murder, incest, rape, theft, um, uh, dis, lying, stuff like that. Now, they may, the way they may be formalized may be different in every culture, but we all have these universal taboos. The reason why we have these universal taboos is because they were all, without them, eh, we couldn't have we couldn't have human civilization, right? And it seems that there is some sort of innate morality for which we were all born, but just like we have to go to school or whatever to learn language and learn, rules of grammar and all that sort of stuff, we also need some sort of moral education, which is what Immanuel Kant preached in his deontological ethics, or which is duty ethics. He taught that there's certain ways we have to we have to learn how to do moral reasoning. So, to give a long answer to your question, I believe there is something quasi objective about morality, and that is the fact that we all have universal moral instincts. I wouldn't go so far as to say that we have a moral grammar like Dr. Mark Hauser did in his book Moral Minds, which I have that book, by the way. I think I have two, but um, but he and a bunch of others, like my other professors, all agreed that we probably do have some sort of innate universal moral instincts, and that means that that means that um, ethics isn't completely subjective. Head over pills is he said go bust. Man, I haven't seen you in a long time. And Lone Wolf says they're gonna tell him what to do anyway. Well, again, that goes into what we were saying earlier. I mean, well, what I was saying to you earlier, why his handlers might be the ones who were being unethical. Sorry to circle around that, guys. You're gonna see a lot of circling because as I address comments, it's gonna circle back to stuff we just talked about earlier. But I hope you can stay on track with me. Jake McMahon says, I used to be vegan for moral reasons, but educated myself and learned that animals also die from agriculture and it was horrible for my health. Now I need a ton of meat and feel way better. Meat is actually very healthy. It's been down, we've been talked out of it for decades to our own detriment. If you work out, you need to eat meat. And besides that, if you need more meat, there'll be no need to be sucking down these protein shakes because you should be getting all that dietary protein within your actual meals, unless you're like a professional level athlete. But if you're just a casual everyday athlete like the rest of us, you should be getting most of your dietary protein within your meals, which means you should probably eat more meat, not less. It doesn't have to be red meat though, and even if it is red meat, you can eat leaner red meat without all the fat. But yeah, I was vegan for more reasons too, Jake. Like I said, I became vegan because originally I was just looking for more of a vegetarian based diet to eat while I was in college, because I felt burnt out eating just like pizza, McDonald's, and Taco Bell every day, because that's all I could afford, except for like when I was going to Chow Hall. And I ended up being vegetarian for 2 years, and within that 2 years, I was vegan for like maybe 9 months. I just found it too radical, because not only was I not eating meat, like I wouldn't eat any animal based products. I got rid of all my animal based clothing. So I threw away my leather jacket, threw away my expensive sneakers, and I will only wear pleather or synthetic made sneakers, which was crazy. But I was trying to be consistent, because I didn't want to be one of those vegans that people made fun of, that would, not eat any meat, not drink any dairy, or cheese based products, but then be wearing like some some leather Nike sneakers and a leather jacket. And I was all for consistency, but I found it. What I think what an, One of the major things that deterred me from being a vegan was its prescription against. So if you're vegan, it's not just, like I said, food. It's everything that's animal based you should be avoiding. And one of the things was vivisection, or animal experimentation. From a scientific perspective, I just saw that vivisection was still a necessary part of the life sciences as well as the behavioral sciences. Like in both the biological sciences and the behavioral sciences, it was just unavoidable that we um, didn't use animals. And then what am I going to do? Am I going to like take an F for a lab class that has, where we work on animals, or just avoid any of those good classes? Because as a psychology major, um, I was a biopsychology major, so my emphasis was on the biology of psychology. And I was going to take wet labs. If I'm doing a wet lab, I have to work with animals. And then so that was another thing. And then like I was like, at one point I was, going to be pre-med. I was like, I'm not going to avoid dealing with animals. And I thought it was scary that they were trying to push onto students in medical school that just they would work on the human body through just looking at computer programs. I'm like, no, they need to get in there, get into all that little squishy, stinky parts of the body, and actually do their due diligence. I was like, I don't want a doctor who's never worked on a cadaver, never worked on a primate or whatever, or any sort of mammal type animal, and expect them to know how my insides work, or the pain that I might feel from certain treatments. So it was the abhorrence of vivisection that led me to abandon veganism and find it too radical. And then I became a voracious meat eater again. So, and you're absolutely right. Grain and plant agriculture do kill animals. People, a lot of vegans are either unaware, or they pretend they're unaware of the fact uh, that um, agricultural practices necessarily kills animals, because you have to get rid of the pests that would eat your crops, right? And you gotta keep, and sometimes it kills not only the animals that you want to kill to keep them from your crops, but it kills unintended animals as well. Like, you can't do agriculture without harming animals to ensure that your crops grow successfully. So you're absolutely right, and most people don't realize that. Lone Wolf says that's paganism. What are you referring to as paganism? Separate philosophy and religion from your mindset, Lone Wolves. We're not talking religious here. We're talking philosophical, not religious. Ethics, unless we're talking about the divine command theory, most ethics is secular. What what branch philosophy off from religion, as I've tried to explain to my father unsuccessfully because he's an idiot and he's also an asshole, but that's a different story. But what 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 separated philosophy from ancient religion was that the ancient philosophers, and the oldest we know of were the Ionian philosophers, who were pre-Socratic philosophers, who sought to look at mechanistic ways of how the world works, instead of looking at it from a theistic way, a way of explaining it through gods and spirits. Instead, they sought to look at it from a mechanistic point of view, like what sort of natural processes do we have that cause these things to happen in the world. That was the separation of philosophy and religion, and in such, ethics predates a lot of organized religions, particularly virtue ethics. Virtue ethics is probably one of the oldest forms of ethics outside of the divine command theory. It has nothing to do with paganism. Paganism is another form of religion. It has nothing to do with ethics. If you can't separate those two, then you can't really talk about ethics. I'm sorry. And what we're talking about, meat, has nothing to do with paganism. I said veganism. Vegan veganism is a quasi philosophical view on what is the right thing to do as pertaining to how we treat animals. And as, like I said, veganism goes beyond merely not eating meat. Not eating meat is just called strict vegetarianism, right? And because you have different forms, you have you have lacto ovo vegetarians, people who don't eat meat but still eat eggs and dairy. You have lacto vegetarians who still have dairy products but no eggs. You have ovo vegetarians, people who don't eat dairy products or meat but still eat egg products. Then you have quasi you have semi vegetarians, people who rarely eat meat, but if they do, it might be like chicken and fish. Then you have the I forgot the name for it, but you have the vegetarians who don't eat any meat, dairy, or egg products, but will occasionally eat fish. Then you have strict vegetarians who won't eat any meat products, dairy products, egg products, fish or poultry products, whatever. Uh, then you have ones that become even stricter than that. You have those who follow a strictly microbiotic diet. I don't, you don't really hear about that anymore. I think that was more of a fad in the 80s, somewhere between the late 70s to early 90s. The microbiotic diet, you don't really see that anymore. But they will only eat stuff from this nasty formula, which is supposed to sustain all their needs. Most of them were pretty malnutrition, so it didn't last long. Then you have the most extreme form, which is called breatharianism. These are people, and I'm going to say this very bluntly, I think they're all liars, but these are people who think that they only need to breathe air and get daily sunlight to survive. They don't need to eat anything. I think all those people are liars, and I'm pretty sure breatharians, if you could catch them on a camera, you'll see them scarfing down some food when they think no one else is observing them. But breatharians are all liars as far as I'm concerned. But that's the most radical thing there is. In any case, none of that refers to paganism. This all refers to quasi philosophical views on humane treatment of animals and what are the good things to eat. Peter Singer himself, who wrote Animal Liberation, himself was not a vegan, and he thought that he himself thought veganism was too radical. He thought that it is he thought that it was the moral thing to do to be a vegetarian, but he didn't believe that required being a vegan. Okay. One was says God didn't say we couldn't eat meat, and God is not a pagan. That doesn't really make sense. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm not trying to be funny, Lone Wolves. I know you're being sincere, but I think you're kind of confusing concepts here. That's all. Liam Mike Mars says God is most definitely pagan. You can see this in the first commandments. uh, yeah, I don't understand what he's saying either, Jake. Like, I, I I see where he's trying to go, but it's just not coherent with what we're talking about. And I've never said one way or other whether God commanded us to eat meat. I've never made a statement saying he did or didn't. That wasn't even the discussion. And I don't think any of the people who talked about animal liberation or animal rights, and there's a distinction between animal liberation and animal rights, by the way. I don't want to get into that so much, but between animal rights activists and people who just believe in animal liberation, I'm not sh- I'm not sure that any of them have argued that on religious grounds. It's usually on moral grounds or political grounds, not so much religious grounds. Some people have argued that on religious grounds, but it's kind of dubious. Lone Wolf says it's bestiality and moral. So I don't sure. I'm not sure if you were in the chat when I was just discussing. Excuse me, not discussing. Discussing um, the distinction between morality, societal norms, and personal taste. And I said that in a class on moral behavior and stuff like that, taught by one of my professors, one of my favorites. He described, the distinction between morality and societal norms and personal distaste. And he gave the example of, seeing another kid give a dog red rockets, and which is a form of bestiality. I just don't want to describe it here because it's kind of disgusting. But he was saying, whereas I might find that disgusting, there was nothing inherently immoral about it. He said, although it looked like the dog was enjoying it. but is beast is bestiality immoral? Not necessarily. Only if it's causing harm to oneself or others, undue harm to oneself or others, would it be immoral. Now, if you're like doing this in a way to, now, if you're doing it with the intent to injure or make the animal suffer, yes, it is immoral. Okay. If you're doing it with the intent, again, with the intent to harm that animal, to make it suffer, yes, that is immoral. And the person is probably a psychopath. But bestiality in itself, is it immoral? No. Only if it's done with the intent to harm that animal in some way, then yes. Like I said, the key word when we think of morality is is harm, undue harm, or unjustified harm, intentional harm, harm. If it's not involving harm, it's probably not immoral. It might just be something that's against social norms or something that is personally disgusting. So, BSK says young CV adios. Oh, that must have been someone I booted out earlier. I don't remember. Jake says that makes sense to me. We clearly evolved as moral beings, but I think the specifics are somewhat subjective to the individual. Yeah, so like I said, there's a strong case to be made that morality is relative. And like I said, the only thing that really rebuts that is the fact that we have that we all display moral instincts from early on child. Like we can look at uh, the studies of children, and they have certain understandings of when something is right or wrong at you know even as infants. So, and this goes and this crosses different cultures. So, and then we also look at societies all across the world, even pre-modern societies or societies we would used to call like savage, or and they seem to have the same universal taboos that we do against things like murder, theft, um, dishonesty, grape, um, the cheating, stuff like that. So the fact that we all have universal moral instincts leads to there being something out there that we can consider objective morality. And it seems to be what we need to ensure that human civilization is possible. We'll get to that. Frosty, what's up? He says, "Sub bub, love this guy." Peppermount Aries back. Hey sir, what's up? Jake McMahon says, "Not blaming you, but YouTube is really lagging. The comments are about 5 minutes ahead." No, it's not YouTube's fault. That's my fault, Jake. That is, I'll put that blame squarely on myself. I'm scrolling through the comments and I'm trying to catch everyone's comments, so I'm always going to be about 5 minutes behind in the comments until I like. Usually I catch up because I'll just skirt through all the trolling comments, but that's what puts me a little bit behind. Um, Peppermint Mount says, "I'm just trying to make sure I look at my package of foods and they have simple ingredients I can read. If the food has ingredients in it I can't pronounce, I don't buy it." Well, do you live in America? Because almost all of our ingredients are broken down in chemical, in terms of their chemical compounds, and they do that intentionally. It's intentionally done to mislead the public about what they're actually consuming. And the FDA and others have tried to like curtail that a bit, saying that the inscriptions need to, the ingredients actually need to be broken down in common vernacular for folks to understand what they're eating, because there's no reason to describe ingredients by their chemical compounds, because there has been literally chemists who have said that if they weren't chemists, they wouldn't have understood what this stuff was, and some of them had to look up some of these things themselves because the people making these things up are doing it deliberately, so to confuse the consumers and what they're buying. Peppermint Aries says the problem was you at Tim's. You spoke on it first. Oh yeah, the little trolling comment. Yeah, got it. Jake Miz is good roll pepper. I cut grains out too. I don't know what Pink Posse retracted, so I don't know what happened. Travis says Trump or Biden gave us animals to eat. Again, guys, that wasn't the topic of discussion. That was literally what one guy was talking about lone wolves, and he was, I think he was a little befuddled in what we were talking about. He was confusing some religious concepts with certain moral prescriptions, and I was saying one has nothing really to do with the other. Not at least not in the context of this conversation. Where the actual question was, what what ethical theory do you guys think is the best to live by? Okay, and I gave a breakdown of the five major camps, which is, you know, um, at least for normative ethics, you have deontology, consequentialism, um, virtue ethics, uh, moral relativism, uh, and then you have on the descriptive side, you have this, descriptive ethics and moral psychology. So, in any case, under those five camps, you have many, many different ethical theories within those five medical ethical theory camps. Okay. And I was saying, what do you guys find the best to live by? Like I said, one that was often seen to be the best in recent decades used to be utilitarianism, which was the thought that how do you maximize the most the most good for the most people, and it became sort of a moral calculus of if you do X, then it'll lead to more people being happy than people being unhappy. And the problem with utilitarianism, with almost every form of utilitarianism except for maybe one or two versions, is that they all fail the Emmett Till test. So I didn't get into this before. So if utilitarianism is a form of consequentialism, and consequentialism is a meta-ethical theory which defines what is ethical by its um, moral consequences. The problem with that is that there's always the problem with every form of consequentialism or consequentialist ethics is that there's always unforeseen consequences to any sort of moral act, right? And they got an if if you need an example of that, you can watch the TV show that came out. It's still on Netflix now, but I think it used to be on NBC before it moved to Netflix, called the Good Place, but with Ted Danson and some other people in it. Very good show. Very good introduction to moral theory and ethics. Um, there's always unforeseen consequences to any moral act, no matter in what, no matter the intention, right? So this this is in this is in sharp contrast to deontology, which is duty ethics, which is you are doing it. You're not doing things for to ensure the right consequences. You're doing it because it's the right. You're doing it because it's the right thing to do, because you have the right reasons for it. Um, that's deontology. So I will fall more on the deontological side than the consequentialist side. And consequentialism is a form of utilitarianism is a form of consequentialism, which is you're maximizing the most good for the most people, which is a type of looking ahead to the consequences. And again, I said the biggest breakdown of utilitarianism is the Emmett Till hypothesis, which is, you know, if framing an innocent if framing an innocent black kid for the grape of a white female just because it'll calm down the town, and it's like, hey, let's go out and lynch this kid, and everyone will be satisfied, and people won't be bloodthirsty anymore. That's not ethical. That's not ethical. And most forms of utilitarianism fail that. Fail that. So I hope that helps. But for that rules out one for me. And I think it was joked about in my philosophy department that people who came to our university saw that we had a strong anti-utilitarianism bent. But I think it's justified that a lot of people are anti-utilitarianism these days because the fact that it fails that Emmett Till test and other scenarios like it shows that it can't be ethical. If you're going to merely satisfy a bunch of people by the wrongdoing to one or few people in doing so, then that's not ethical. This is why Kirk disagreed with. I'm gonna get nerdy for a second. This is why Kirk disagreed with Spock when he said, why did you come back to this planet and save me? He's like, you disobeyed, you disobeyed Starfleet. You stole us a starship, and you risked the entire crew just to save one person. He said, why would you do that? And Kirk said, because sometimes the needs of the few outweighs the needs of the many. Because Spock, being a Vulcan, thought that utilitarianism, since it deals in strictly a moral calculus, is the more logical system of ethics, but it's not. Sometimes the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. If Emmett Till continuing his life was against the needs of the many, of a bunch of bigots, so be it. So get back into these comments. Sorry, guys. So Jake says, that's good to know. I'm getting into fasting, so I might try that to bulk beforehand. If you're trying to bulk up, just more protein. Yeah. T-Side says, hope you're staying strong, brother. Keep stepping forward. Thank you. What did Pink Posse write, guys? Because you all saying you agree with them. I don't or she. I'm sure not saying either or. But they've been all retracted, so I don't know what Pink Posse said, but I guess it was something good. Jake McMahon says full food fast or full on water fast. So I myself do not recommend fasting. I don't unless you're doing it for a medical procedure. I don't recommend fasting. I don't think it's healthy. I think if you're trying to become more lean, just eat less. But I don't believe in fasting. I don't think it's a healthy. If it's not something you can do on a consistent basis, it's not. Then I don't think it's a particularly healthy thing to do. It's just like fad diets. I don't think fad diets are good because it's not something you can consistently do. Fasting is the same thing. The only time I would tell someone to fast, the one and only time I would tell someone to fast outside of a medical procedure would be to cut weight to be eligible for a fight. That's the only time you should be fasting is if you need to cut weight to make your fighting weight. That is the only time I would recommend fasting. Other than that, I don't recommend fasting. I would just say just eat smaller portions to get to your desired weight or to get to your leaner look. But I don't recommend fasting because your body needs daily, uh, daily nutrition. Like your whole, your energy, your the energy that that your body uses, your cellular energy comes from your food. If you look at the whole ATP cycle and glycolysis and all of that sort of stuff, um, you need to be consuming food, especially if you're going to be physically active. It's not healthy to be doing athletics and not and fasting at the same time. Like I said, the only time I would recommend fasting would be if you need to cut weight to make fighting weight. That's it. But I don't recommend fasting. And I know, and I don't recommend detoxing, guys. We already have several organs in our body that detoxes us. We have a liver, we have kidneys, and for those who haven't had it removed, we have a gallbladder. Those 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 organs do all our detoxing, not and so does our digestive system. Our digestive system does a little bit of detoxification as well as things are pushed through our long digestive tract. Okay, the, what most people do to detox their bodies is actually quite unhealthy. But yeah, I knew about the leg, Jake. That's just me following through the comments. Organic herbal teas, they can be delicious, but again, don't recommend. I don't recommend that for medical purposes or health purposes. Jake says, I don't really see that as a problem with utilitarianism. For me, it's about the intended consequences or lack thereof. So there's two major versions of utilitarianism. But again, there's actually three. So there's hedonistic utilitarianism, which was the original version put forth by John Stuart Mill, the British empiricist. Um, but then you have rule utilitarianism and act utilitarianism. And there's been like multiple combinations of those. Okay. But they all pretty much reduce down to just one form of utilitarianism. And that is the only one that is actually like a good ethical theory. There's only like just one form of there's two forms of utilitarianism. One is a form of rule utilitarianism and one is a form of act utilitarianism. And that one form reduces to the other. So you could really just say there's one. And that is really the only one that one could say there's actually like a justifiable ethical theory. Most of the other ones fail in that regard. Okay. And like I said, almost all of them except for that one or two forms fail the Emmett Till test. Almost all of them fail it. So that's why most people aren't utilitarians this day. Jake says rule utilitarianism would be against blaming a black kid for grape. No, if truth is a moral, then it should be. If truth is a moral rule, then it should result in more positive consequences. Well, that's not how they see it. And again, there's like dozens of versions of rule utilitarianism, and there's dozens of versions of act utilitarianism. I'm not going to get into all the different complicated versions of them, but like I said, almost all of them fail the Emmett Till test. Almost all of them do. Jake says, I'm not a total utilitarian, by the way. There's one big issue that I have with it, and so there's a caveat that I also place. Who who the consequences are for matter are are matter to me. I would rather have positive outcomes for an innocent child than a rapist. Um, yeah. So, like I said, the other problem with utilitarianism is that it's a form of consequentialist ethics. And like I said, all consequentialist ethics have the problem that there can always be unforeseen consequences to any moral act. So it seems kind of dubious to base any form of ethics on the intended consequences, because um, human behavior is just, well, social behavior is just way too complicated than that. Like I said, a good reason to see why is to see that TV show called the Good Place. It kind of puts it into perspective in a way that is feasible for a lot of people to do without looking at very old dry philosophy texts. Lone Wolf says, or you're seeking Lord thy God. Again, I appreciate your religious faith, Lone Wolves, but if we're talking strictly, like I said, if we're talking strictly ethics here, the, the divine command theory is one of the worst ethical theories there is. So that that's not to say that you can't be inspired by your religious faith to do what is right. I think by and large, most religious people on the day to day are very um, moral folks, but I think that's because they themselves are moral folks, not because of their faith. I think their faith may inspire their moral behavior, not. I'm sorry. I think their moral, I think their moral instincts inspire their religious faith, not the other way around. So, when we look at people like Martin Luther King, I think it wasn't his religious beliefs that inspired him to be moral. It was his moral drive that inspired his religious faith. So Jake said I did a 4-day water fast and a 3-day dry fast and it's gone now. Wanting to do more to heal other health issues. Not just be careful with what you're doing to your body. Jake says I did all right. The water fast was actually harder after 4 days. I was in pain, so I stopped. That's what I'm saying. There's no need to do that to yourself. Like I said, unless you are trying to cut weight to make it to qualify for a prize fight, I don't see the purpose of fasting. I don't. Or uh, or you're doing competitive like competitive fitness or competitive bodybuilding, something of that nature, something competitive where you have to cut weight in a short amount of time. That is the only time I would say that fasting would be a good idea. Otherwise, I don't think it's healthy for the average person to do. I said, Jake says, my skin did get better. I'm going to build up to an 11-day dry fast slowly and safely. Almost as faith that teaches morals. Uh, Pink Posse, I appreciate what you're talking, but can you keep it on the given topic, please? Uh, because I'm, trying to talk about one thing, that then you guys are talking about another, and it's kind of making the conversation discombobulated. But it's late, guys. I'm about to go. Oh my God, it's 12:54. I didn't know it was so late. Um, and like I said, I wanted to keep this on ethics. So I am going to end this on talking about where I am with what ethical theories I follow, with if any. So initially, I wasn't following any. there was, like I said, my professor gave one inkling of a sorry, of an ethical theory that he proposed called folk-based practice consequentialism, was a form of consequentialism which is based on the actual ethics that everyday people practice in their, in their day-to-day lives, based on our universal moral instincts, which tend to be made into some sort of formulaic law or codes or prescriptions through religion and law or societal norms, whatever. And it it's quite convincing, but he did give its limits as well because it is a form of consequentialism. However, he said given that limit that is consequentialism, excuse me, let me get some water. Sorry. But he said given its inherent limits as a form of consequentialism, he thought that it can be utilized because it's actually based on just common sense reasoning about moral behavior, right? And it has a certain uh, savoir faire to it, but what I was particularly attracted to was the social contractarianism proposed by John Rawls, who wrote A Theory of Justice back in the 70s and made a shorter form of it that I read, um, which is Justice is Fairness, which was like the more abridged form of his longer book, A Theory of Justice. He said that, and this became like such a well-read book on philosophy of law, that this is one of the few philosophers that is studied in law school, and he basically brought back philosophy of law into like contemporary times, because up until then philosophy of law was something that was considered quite anachronistic, and only this, you will only probably talk about in the history of philosophy. But he brought it back to being a respectable field of study within philosophy in the 70s. And he died in the early 2000s as well, unfortunately. Um, he said that imagine a veil of ignorance, which is that as we all come into the world, that we don't know where we'll end up in life. Some of us might end up professors, billionaires, MMA fighters, or you might end up behind bars. You might end up an invalid. We don't know behind this veil of ignorance where we end up. So knowing that none of us know a priori where we'll end up in life, doesn't it make sense that we should give everyone equal due respect until shown otherwise that they don't deserve it? That was the thought experiment he came up with the veil of ignorance. And he proposed a form of social contractarianism. Social contractarianism is the ethical theory that our ethics are basically a social agreement that we all uh, unconsciously or maybe consciously, but not formally, but informally agree to go by for the purposes of a cohesive society. And this is hinted at all the way back with Jeremy Bentham in the Leviathan, which he said that, you know, early humanity, pre-modern society was short, nasty, and brutish. That before we had kingdoms and chiefdoms and stuff like that, that we were in a constant state of tribal warfare. And that it was better to be under the rule of a of some sort of king or you know prince or whatever or governor that can provide stability to society, even if that society sucks, even if that society is unfair, is inequitable. The inequities inherent in modern society is still better than the brutish nature of pre-modern society, of constant tribal warfare and village pillaging and grape and all that sorts of nasty stuff, right? So Jeremy Bentham, way back in this 15, 1600s, said gave this argument in his book The Leviathan. A lot of people weren't convinced because they was like, no, we can do a lot better than this. But he wasn't completely wrong. He was just a realist. He was just a pragmatic person. And so he wasn't the only person who thought this way. But it was John Rawls who brought social contractarianism back to contemporary times and gave a better outlook on it. He some would agree with the moral relativists that morals are often relative, and it could be better seen as certain rules that we have that are part of the social agreement that we all abide to curtail some of our freedoms for the sake of there being a cohesive society in which we can all live safely and happily. Uh, but he also agreed that, you know, to do so, we probably should have some sort of moral education or reasoning in the sense of what Immanuel Kant thought in his view of um, deontological ethics, which was that we have to do what's right because of it's our duty within society or whatever. So John Rawls kind of agree with that notion that there has to be some sort of moral education um, to kind of solidify the social agreement that we all have for the betterment of society. But he might have agreed somewhat with the with the moral relativist that we can't say that these are that morals are objective facts of the world because that's simply not true. They're more like very complicated rules of behavior that describe our social agreements that allow society to go along. This is social contractarianism within a nutshell. And this is what John Rawls proposed. And he said the bedrock of this is looking at the idea that we all come into society at at different at different stages in our lives that can be good or bad, but knowing that none of us know how this is going to work out beforehand, we should all be treated with equal respect doing so, and that our justice system in particular should acknowledge this fact. And justice should not be retributive, but it should be a form. Justice shouldn't be defined by retribution, but it should be defined by fairness. The fairness and the fact that we all come into the world equally behind this veil of ignorance before we know that we're going to come out as criminals, or we're going to come out as billionaires, or we're going to come out as celebrities, or we're going to come out as medical surgeons, or we're going to come out as salesmen or whatever. So that is the ethical theory I subscribe to, social contractarianism. With that, I don't have to take a strong stance on whether morality is objective or subjective. I don't have to worry. I don't have to think about what are the consequences of choosing this over the other. I don't have to worry about a theory that is subjective. Don't have to worry about if ethical theory fails certain tests, like the trolley problem or the Emmett Till test, stuff like that. So that's where I am with it. And I'll get back to these comments, and then I'm about to end this, guys. Uh, wow, I missed a lot of them. Jake Man says I'll sub you too. Thank you. And if you are also saying it to someone else, good for them. Dilford, what's up? He says, "Hey, Contrarian, hope you had a great fourth. No specific topic today." Yeah, the specific topic was, what do we think is the best ethical theory to live by? And I just gave my rendition of what ethical theory did I subscribe to after 3 hours and 15 minutes. Longwell says ethics is relating to moral principles or the branch of knowledge dealing with these. Mm, more or less, yeah. More or less. Jake says, I'll stop talking about health stuff. Just a contrarian. Sorry for going off topic. Just want to say congrats, Pink Posse. Truly happy for you, be your own health practitioner. Just be cautious of that, guys. We are not the best authorities when it comes to our bodies or our minds. I'll, I'll say that. And that's even if you're an expert, even if you are a neuroscientist, even if you are a physician, even those people defer to other people within their field because they know they're bad at judging their own bodies and minds. So, if even the experts will defer to other experts within their own field when it comes to their bodies and their minds, we should do the same thing as well. That's all I'll say. Rosie Javier says our moral compass comes from God because we are all made in his image. People ignore their built-in moral compass and try to follow their own or follow their words. None of us are born good. None of us are good. Yeah, you missed 3 hours of back conversation, so I'm not going to go into that. I'm just going to say you're simply wrong. Says some are worse than others. Yeah, like I said, you missed what I've repeated at least 3 times throughout this conversation about divine command theory and why it doesn't work. So, good and bad is objective, not subjective. They are patently subjective because are good and bad are quasi religious concepts. What matters and what is objective is pain and suffering. Those are real. Those are objective. Those can be measured. Rosie says, and we know when things are bad because bad things have bad fruits or produce no fruit at all. Again, that's still subjective. There's nothing out there in the world that you can point to as a moral fact. There's nothing you can actually point to and say that is that is a morally bad thing. That is a morally good thing. Any attempt to do so is merely you lay your own you laying your own values on it. And again, I'm not even a moral relativist, but most people do agree with the moral relativist that it's hard to actually point to anything in the world and just say that's a moral fact. It's not. Good things always have good fruits. No, that's simply not true. Like I said, you need to watch the old TV show called A Good Place, which is down on Netflix. This is why consequentialism doesn't work as an ethical theory because there are always unforeseen consequences to all behave to any sort of moral act. Even things done with the best intents, even done with good consequences, often have other consequences besides the good consequences, because behavior is messy and causes a causal chain of events that can be both good and bad. There's nothing that someone can do that's always going to be just good, and something someone's going to do that's always bad. It's just, that's not how life actually works. Said, what's up, man? What's today's topic? Well, it was, what is the ethical theory that's best to live by, but we're coming to the conclusion. Rosie, you're going by your own standards. Your standards of God doesn't apply to other people. You're talking about your religion, which doesn't apply to two-thirds of the world. Lots of parts of the world are, many parts of the world, people are Buddhist, Hindu, Sikh, Taoist, atheist, agnostic, deistic, and even within Christianity, there's about 1,000 different doctrines. So, what makes you think your particular Christian doctrine out of all the thousands of other Christian doctrines is the correct one outside of your own subjective acceptance of that? And you don't understand philosophy. You can't simply double down on something that says morals are objective facts because morals are objective facts. That doesn't work in logic. Saying X is X is not a logical truth. unless unless it unless saying that X isn't X leads to a logical contradiction. Anyway, Delphi says Rosie is not always true though. In a war, each side thinks they are the good guys. Guys, there's no point in arguing with her. She's a very religious person. We know that people who have beliefs that fall outside of that fall outside of rationality can't be convinced through reason alone. They can only be convinced through emotional appeals. I'm not going to attempt to do any emotional appeals to her because it's too late in the night for me to do so. I could, but it would be a waste of my time, and it would be a waste of any of your time to try to convince her otherwise. If she's so convinced that God is so good, let her explain the last 6,000 years of humanity without going to the obvious arguments that they all do, which she can't. Jake says, I agree with Bentham, to be honest, on society being better. I think tribal society was preferable before the mass extinction of our megafaunal prey over the last 20,000 years. No, Bentham was right on that, Jake. The sheer mayhem, and Steven Pinker talks about this too in a good book, The Better Angels of, what's it called? The Better Angels of of our nature, I think, by Steven Pinker. If you look at the trajectory of the history of violence from that time on, pre-modern society was pure mayhem, just day to day, just day to day violence. In in absolute numbers, it was less violence, but that's it's only less violence in absolute numbers in that time because there was less people. But in relative numbers, that violence was magnitude much greater than it was today. The closest we've seen to the sheer amount of violence that must have existed in tribal time and in pre-modern societies, which we know through looking at Some of our, you know, paleo biological evidence of seeing how many of these um, human remains show violence done to them. The only the only thing greater than the amount of sheer violence experienced, well, the only thing probably, like I said, tantamount to what we've seen in the sheer violence of tribal society was the Great World Wars, right? Like World War I, World War II, the Crusades, um, stuff like that. Maybe the the Mongolian conquest and all stuff like that. That was sheer mayhem. But aside of that, as soon as we entered out of tribal pre-modern societies into pre-modern societies, those of like chiefdoms and nation states and kingdoms and empires, violence took a sheer drop. It was still pretty bad though when you look at the dark, like once you left pre-modern society and we went into the era of antiquity, like Hellenistic Greece, the Roman era, um, Ottoman Empire, all those sort of things. We saw a sheer drop in violence. Then it ticked with the Dark Ages, with the fall of the Roman Empire. It ticked back up a bit, but still not as high as during tribal times. Dark Ages was pretty bleak, but still not as bleak as tribal society. And from then on, it was just like a lot of medieval and violence or feudal violence in other parts of the world until we got to like modern society around the late 1500s, and we saw like a sharp drop in violence again, which only took ticks in like major wars of the time, like the wars of the European empires, like with the British, the French, the Russians, the Spanish, all of those folks, right? Those 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 wars of conquest in modern Europe gave us a little blip, but it still was still a sharp climb. So if tribal modern warfare is up here, then here's like the antiquity era, then here's the Middle Ages, right? Then here's modern, and then after modern, we go into the contemporary era, like the 20th century and beyond. But it shot back up a little bit with World War I, came down. World War II came back down again. A little bit up for Korean War and Vietnam War, but steadily down, 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 down. Then the biggest spike we've had in contemporary times was in the 1990s, at least in American society, with drug and gun culture and stuff like that. We saw a huge tick, but still not as big as modern era, medieval era, uh, Greco-Roman era, you know, and tribal era. Like that's so. Bentham was right. He didn't get everything right. Like I think he was wrong to say that in a living a in a living under a despot ruler is still better than pre-modern society, than living in a pre-modern society. I think he was wrong on that because even if by the numbers living under a despotic ruler was still safer than a pre-modern society, it was still it would still be pretty bad. So that was the only part that Jeremy Bentham I think got wrong was that even living under a despotic ruler would be worse, would still be better than living in a pre-modern society. That he was wrong about. But pretty much his overall argument was right. So Jake said, yeah, he would have had no way of knowing that at the time, but he was definitely a smart guy. Yeah, agreed on that. Dilfer says, is abortion good or bad? Both sides will say they are the good guys. Rosie, it's not that simple. Yeah, let's not even go into that issue. I don't even want to say that word. Like this, those are one of many words you not shouldn't say on YouTube too often if you don't want the algorithm to trigger and get you demonetized or hide your uh, content. Rosie says, if a culture says such and such is right, does it make it so? No, it's wrong. The person who the act is being done to will feel it, and the person doing it will know it too if you choose to justify yourself. That's another thing. We've already went over that. I'm sorry, you I'm sorry if you come to the party late and you missed out on all the goods, but that's figuratively what happened here. Everything you're discussing, we've already discussed earlier. We've already discussed why ethical legalism doesn't work. We know that ethical that has nothing to do with with God, with listening to God being ethical, because with now you're referring to ethical legalism. We've all agreed, I think, we've all agreed that ethical legalism is not, it's not it's not a the best way to look at morality, because ethical legalism can prescribe things that are unethical but they're legal, and vice versa can can make things illegal which are ethical. So we already understand that, as most adults understand, that legal does not equal ethical, and that ethical legalism isn't a good ethical theory. We can all agree on that one. But we talked about that earlier, and so we're gonna have to conclude this, guys. Thanks, Jake. I appreciate it. Why is the 786s? Why do you think this heat is immensely scorching us? Well, one is just the day to day of weather. If you live in a northern hemisphere and it's the summertime, so there's the day to day weather interactions, but there also has been obviously climate change over the last 100 or so years since the industrial revolution. We've known that because we've had the Department of Energy discuss this over 50 years ago. We've had these energy corporations like Exxon and others say this in their research back then. We know all this, but that's kind of a different subject. BSK says never self-diagnosed. Yeah, that's what I'm trying to tell them. BSK, like they're talking like these different, and it's no diss to Jake nor the other person who never spoke to me, Pink Posse, but yeah, self-diagnosing is never healthy, and like I said, experts know not to self-diagnose themselves, so we shouldn't do so either, because we're less knowledgeable than the experts, and if even the experts defer to other experts within their own field for diagnoses, we shouldn't try to diagnose ourselves either when we have even less information than they do. People who've dedicated their whole lives to these very things. So I say it's a big mistake to self-diagnose oneself. But Rosie says the truth is the truth outside of an opinion. That's not how truth works, Rosie. Truth is a semantic concept, and opinions are just statements. And statements like all uh, assertions are either true or false. That's one of the most basic principles of logic. The principle of bivalence. every statement is true or false. Every. So even if you say, well, that statement is neither true nor false, it still stands to the fact that it's not true, so it's therefore it's false. So an opinion is going to either be true or false. We may not always know whether an opinion is true or false, but we can. That's why we. But we can know if someone has an informed opinion or an uninformed opinion. Um, and then we also know whether statements are rational or irrational. A rational statement is one that can be that has rational grounds for asserting that statement. Irrational statements don't have rational grounds for its assertion. Um, Likewise, uninformed opinions are opinions that aren't backed by any sort of prior knowledge or coherence with other known truths. Um, so you're kind of confusing those things. It's a little muddled. And you're saying the side that would say such and such is morally right is wrong. I don't get that. So anyway, this is about to end because my phone's literally about to cut off soon and I didn't put it on the plug. Your statement is truth is not true. You don't understand logic. You don't understand basic logic. I recommend if you are truly interested in these sort of ethical thoughts, stuff like that, watch the show A Good Place, which is available on Netflix if you have Netflix. Or it might be on Peacock, I think. And Pink Posse, you're gonna stop retracting these statements so that only other people can see them, and then I find it a little disconcerting. So, guys, when this ends, I'm just gonna end it. Um, so, uh, Pink Posse, all these retracted messages, I find it disconcerting. Stand if you're gonna if you're gonna keep putting stuff in the chat room, stand on it. Don't keep retracting it. I find that I find it a bit annoying at this point. I find it very annoying. Plus, you're not even talking about the given topic, which means you're distracting from the topic that I've selected. If you're gonna distract from the given topic, be courteous and drop a cash app. If you're not gonna be courteous and drop a cash app, then don't distract from the conversation. We're not talking about your little, and I'm just gonna say it, your little quack health advice you're giving people. I don't want people spreading quack health advice in my channel. So I don't want people to harm themselves getting bad advice that they saw on my live stream because some nutball is expressing their opinions and you have no medical background. You are not a medical doctor. You don't have any medical training. You're a weirdo who's has no icon that that shows your actual face. I don't trust it. And you keep retracting all your statements.